her parishioners as Mother Lisa. So thank you, Reverend. We look forward to your invocation. And this will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All who are able to, please stand.
Please bow your head with me and let us pray. Almighty God, we call upon you this evening to be present to those of us gathered in this space. Inspire us to do your will in all the work that we have before us in this beautiful town of Southport. We thank you especially for giving us this small piece of paradise. Forgive us when we fail to put your will first, or when we fail to love our neighbors as we are loved. But especially be with us and remind us of your grace and mercy as we progress in beautiful ways, honest ways, in the Southport way. Be with us also as we go out into the world, sharing your joy and the joy that we have together in this space. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Reverend Lisa, and we look forward to seeing you at St. Philip's. Next item on our agenda is item D, public comment. We do have a public hearing on conditional zoning this evening, but if you'd like to speak in public comment concerning conditional zoning, that's fine, but it would flow better if you waited until the public hearing where your questions can be answered and we can have some back and forth and that type thing. So, Madam Clerk.
Randy Jones.
Good evening. Randy Jones. I'm here to represent the 2023 North Carolina 4th of July Festival as the president. I wanted to come before you, Mayor Hayden, Board of Aldermen, to thank you for all the support you have given us through the year to what I would say is a successful 4th. But I also am up here to thank the staff. If it wasn't for Chief Drew and the fire department, we had the firemen's competition, and then just all they did during the festival for dealing with emergencies and just with people with the heat. Chief Coring and the police department for keeping us safe. Heather for the Parks and Rec in your games. For Dory helping with our welcoming ceremony. And for a special thank you to Elena Dale in the Community Relations Department. She worked as an administrator to kind of keep all of us straight. So I really want to stand before you and say thank you. If it wasn't for you, I don't think the 4th would be what it is. It's the support of the city, it's the support of the citizens, and it's the support of all the volunteers that really make the festival work. And I really stand before you to say thank you. It was, it's always a challenge to invite 40,000 people into your town, but I think we do it with a smile. We bleed red, white, and blue in Southport, and I think we should be proud. So again, thank you, and I'll see you in 2024.
Thank you, Randy. It was a marvelous 4th. Madam Clerk.
Ray Martino.
Hey, Mr. Martino, welcome.
Evening. Mayor, I'm going to have a comment about conditional zoning, but I'll do that later. But I had another comment. I watched a Board of Aldermen meeting recently on Facebook, and the topic of music, outside music and noise came up. So I was on the car today and listened to NPR, and there was an interview with Trombone Shorty, who's one of my favorite jazz musicians. He's from New Orleans, and he was talking, it was a long interview, but he was talking about when he was a very young player, they would just play on the streets. And at some point, the police were walking around with noise meters and harassing them, arresting them. The community protested, and they finally stopped that and allowed musicians to be musicians. When you think of New Orleans, you think of food and music. And I'm just going to say, let's be careful about the music thing, because to me, a big part of the culture and appeal of Southport is the abundance of surprisingly good music around. So I'd hate to put a damper in that. That's all I had to say. I'll talk later. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Randy Jones would like to say something else.
Yes. Well, we have a flexible policy here. Anyone who needs to speak again, please do.
Sorry, I actually sat down and remembered I left one of our most important departments out, Public Works, because they work tirelessly to get the town ready for the 4th. They do all this hard work during it. And then, as we all can attest to, July 5th, you would never know that this festival took place. So I really wanted to come back up here and say thank you specifically to Tom Stanley and his crew, because they make it look effortless, and we never take you for granted. So thank you, and I just appreciate you letting me come back up and say that.
Yeah, those streets will look pretty ugly next year. You hadn't caught that, so that was very good, Randy. Thank you. Next, Madam Clerk.
Karen Rife,
Okay.
Tracy O'Brien,
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Adam Stedman,
Thank you, everyone. I'm Adam Stedman. I've spoken a few times in the past regarding the budget and budget issues in general. I have to say, I have to express disappointment in this most recent budget. It seemed that there was an informal consensus of a 24% ad valorem rate, and it seemed at the last second it was bumped up to 27 cents. And I think the justification was, oh, we can't continue to kick the can down the road, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty much the same justifications provided the last couple of years for drastically increasing our taxes. And, I think it's unacceptable, frankly. I understand there was a desire to keep everything revenue neutral. I mean, I think in the most technical sense, at least in terms of existing residents, the 27 cents was revenue neutral, so I do appreciate that. However, the city manager did recommend 24 cents, and it seemed to be a well-justified budget, and unfortunately, the 3 cents were added. I do, I'm hoping that, you can turn lemons into lemonade and actually really dedicate this extra money toward infrastructure and actually fixing our roads, as opposed to just adding more bureaucracy. Because, I think that's the process in terms of adding more employees, I think, is a bit flawed. I think there was really an open solicitation. Basically each department was asked and solicited as to, well, do you need more employees? Obviously, if you ask someone if he or she needs a new employee, that person is generally going to say, oh yeah, it would be nice to add a new employee. And that seems to be what happened here. You had all these requests for new employees. There wasn't an actual justification provided for a lot of these employees. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. There were a couple paramedics for which there was real justification provided. So I don't want to make such a blanket statement, but for most departments, there wasn't really any justification provided, and the employees were added anyway. So, I really do hope that in the future, the town really requires each department to justify new additions. And I don't want to speak poorly of all city employees. In fact, I've been in contact with the clerk and some others, and they've done a great job. They're very friendly, they're very competent. So I don't want it to be a blatant condemnation of city employees. I'm just saying, in terms of budgetary decisions, we really should be more prudent. And also I want to remind everyone that we had a 35% tax increase last year. I would think that would be enough to, to take care of any employee concerns, okay? Okay, and then another thing that I was thinking, in terms of elections, we have two wards, Ward 1 and Ward 2, if I'm not mistaken. I don't understand why we need two separate wards. Generally, districts or wards would be more useful in towns that are of diverse geographic population. When you have diverse regions of town, it seems that our town is kind of arbitrarily divided by House Street, and you have one ward on one side and one ward on the other. All voters can vote for either ward, so it doesn't really seem to make much sense to have, two separate wards. It seems, the interests of one ward versus the other don't really seem to diverge very much. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my impression. And, just based on hearsay, my understanding is, as of now, of the recent filings for the election, 5 people have filed for, aldermen on one ward, and only 1 has filed on the other ward. So you basically have this discrepancy where you have one ward, everyone who happens to reside on one side of town filing for, 2 seats on one ward. So I think it might be a good idea just to, consider eliminating the wards, because we're a small town. The 2 different wards aren't really that different in terms of, there aren't many regional differences between the wards so as to justify having 2 separate wards. So that's something I think the aldermen should keep in mind for the future, and maybe a process could be done or could be made to, eliminate those wards. That's everything. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Laura Sharkey. Stephen Carpenter.
Anyone else, Madam Clerk? Okay, good. Is there anyone else here that would like to speak in public comment on a different topic, or any topic that has not, did not sign up? Okay, great. All righty. Thank you. Item E is approval of the agenda, and I'd like to read the ethics statement first. If any members know of any conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest concerning matters on the agenda, please so state at this time. No conflicts. And what I would like to recommend in terms of the approval of the agenda, with the addition of item G2, this is a proclamation for Walker Jenkins. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda with that one addition. Mayor Pro Tem for the motion and Alderman Lombardi for a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Item F, approval of the consent agenda. On our consent agenda, we have 4 sets of minutes from our budget public hearing, from a Board of Aldermen meeting June 8th, a budget adoption meeting June 21st, and we have a budget amendment number 5. This is how we complete balances and transfers and leases during the from one fiscal year to the next. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. There's a tie, Mayor Pro Tem and Alderman Carroll. Is there a second? Okay. Mr. Lombardi, any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Item G, special recognition. We have 2 tonight, and very excited about both of them. First one is the proclamation for Parks and Recreation Month, and the second one, as I previously stated, a proclamation for baseball player Walker Jenkins. And Heather, if you and Cookie would come up. Thank you. City of Southport proclamation honoring Parks and Recreation Month, July 2023. Whereas parks and recreation are vitally important to establishing and maintaining quality of life in the Southport community, ensuring the health of all citizens and contributing to the economic and environmental health of the city. And whereas parks and recreation programs build healthy, active communities that aid in the prevention of chronic diseases, provide therapeutic recreation services for those who are mentally or physically disabled, and also improves the mental and emotional health of all citizens. And whereas Parks and Recreation is the leading provider of healthy meals, nutrition services, and education. And whereas Parks and Recreation programming and educational activities such as after-school programming, youth sports, and environmental education are critical to childhood development. Whereas our parks and national recreation areas ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas Parks and Recreation is essential and adaptable infrastructure that makes our communities resilient in the face of natural disasters and climate change. And whereas the City of Southport Parks and Recreation Department is responsible for 22 parks, facilities, and recreation amenities, including Waterfront Park and City Dock. And whereas the city's Parks and Recreation Department also sponsors and contributes to many special events, tournaments, and festivals in the city. And whereas the U.S. House of Representatives has designated July as Parks and Recreation Month, and the National Recreation and Park Association has designated July 21st as Parks and Recreation Professionals Day. So now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Joseph P. Hayden, Mayor of the City of Southport, do hereby proclaim that July 2023 is recognized as Park and Recreation Month. I encourage all residents to enjoy the parks and recreation opportunities in Southport and to express their gratitude to those professionals who help make the programs and parks available to the community. And now I'd like to call up Walker Jenkins and his family. I'm honored to have y'all here tonight. Tana Jenkins, Walker's mother, and I have worked together for many years at Dozier Hospital. She's a certified registered nurse anesthetist, and we're old friends and Dozier Hospital family, and Tish and I have known her for a long time, so thank you for being here, and I'm glad y'all could be here tonight so we could honor Walker. City of Southport proclamation honoring Southport baseball player Walker Jenkins. Whereas Walker Jenkins is a graduate of South Brunswick High School, where he excelled in academics and playing baseball. And whereas Walker Jenkins is the two-time North Carolina Gatorade Player of the Year and was ranked as the top high school baseball player in the country in his senior year. Whereas his junior season in 2022, Walker led South Brunswick Cougars to the 3A State Championship Series. And whereas the North Carolina Baseball Coaches Association selected Walker Jenkins as its 3A Player of the Year. Whereas Walker Jenkins had a batting average of .421 with 3 doubles, 2 triples, and 2 home runs. Whereas Walker is the son of Tana and Clay Jenkins, and he gives them credit for much of his success as a person and as a baseball player. Whereas Walker Jenkins committed and signed to play college baseball for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill baseball team. However, he was recently selected by the Minnesota Twins in the first round of the Major League Draft as the 5th overall draft. He most likely will become a professional baseball player right out of high school. Now, yes, clap, yes. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Joseph P. Hatem, Mayor of the City of Southport, do hereby proclaim on this day, July 13th, 2023, the accomplishments of Walker Jenkins and congratulate him, his family, his friends, his teammates, his coaches, his teachers, and his church, and wish him much success as a great young man and as a professional Major League Baseball player.
Hey everybody, I'm Walker. I just want to thank everybody for the support and everything that I've done. Obviously my family has been a huge role in where I'm at, but this community and the support system here as well have played a huge role in where I am today. So I just want to thank y'all and appreciate everything you've done. So.
Thank you. We just watched the All-Star game a few days ago, so maybe one day this young man will be playing at that game. I hope so. What a wonderful family. Item H, agenda. Item 1 will be our public hearing, conditional zoning. Travis Henley, if you want to come up and give a presentation, and I'll entertain a motion to go into public hearing. Alderman Carroll, second by Mayor Pro Tem Mosteller. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. We're in public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Henley, and then we will have our public comment section.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Good evening. Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow that up, especially with this. I don't have much in the way of a formal presentation. I've presented at length at this topic at various meetings in the past, as has Dory, who so graciously stepped up to the plate, no pun intended, with what we just saw for me when I was out sick a couple weeks ago. But more than happy to answer any questions that the board has about this topic. It is included in your packet as draft text. What I will say, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, if there's additional amendments to this draft language that the board would like to see, it has not been adopted yet. So if there's language that you would like to see me write directly and bring it back to you, we can do that. If you would like to remand it back to the planning board and have them do more work, not looking at the chair of the planning board very much when I say that, but that is certainly on the table for the board as an option as well. So again, more than happy to answer any questions that the board has now, or feel free to call on me at any point.
So why don't we have our public hearing aspect of it, and Madam Clerk, if you call the first name, and Mr. Henley will be here, as well as Mr. McLeod from Cape Fear Council of Government is here with any questions as well. So thank you. Madam Clerk.
Ray Martino.
Good evening again. So only 3 items. So at the last meeting, I had urged the city to work harder to create a better communication on conditional zoning. In the past, it's not clear. There's a lack of clarity around this. I know you folks have talked about it, but we're civilians. We are not city planners. We don't understand. It's a foreign language. So the only thing that I recall hearing is that the message is it's more convenient and easier. And I think the public's question is, for whom? It's maybe more easier for the city planners or for the boards, but you failed to address and explain why adopting conditional zoning is in the public's best interest. And I don't mean this to be mean, especially to you, Travis, but I don't care if it's easier for you. I don't care if it's easier for the planning board or the aldermen. What I think the public cares about is how does it improve the lives of the voting citizens of Southport? And that's the message that I don't think has come across, or else maybe I just haven't heard it. So there was a discussion about trust at the last meeting. Alderman Allen said, "Trust us," with the subtext of "we turned Indigo down." Ms. Slaughter implored you not to trust developers. Another speaker whose name I apologize for not remembering questioned, "Okay, we can entrust the existing officials, but how do we trust future officials?" And Alderman Allen was absolutely spot on when he correctly responded that there is no possible legislation that can mandate future trustworthiness. My comment was you hadn't earned the public's trust because there's a lack of transparency around the issue and a lack of clarity. So trust. While I haven't lived here very long, bad on me, longer-term residents have told me that in our recent past, elected folks have acted in a less than transparent and trustworthy manner, and they're no longer our elected officials as a result of that. And it seems we might be moving towards that sort of a stimulus and response again. I can tell everybody that on normally any topic you care to throw on a table, there's at least two sides. I could posit ice cream cones, and I'm sure we'd come up with 3 or 4 different opinions. But I have yet to hear any member of the public say, "Conditional zoning is coming, yippee." So we've heard people advocating for it, but there's just, we don't get it. And so my take at this point is that if the elected folks don't convince the public and get us to believe in the good of conditional zoning, there may well be another set of elected officials that will have to earn the public's trust. And in general, most of the negative comments I've heard around plans or building plans have centered around things that have been proposed or done in compliance with the UDO, where no one has a choice. If they comply with the UDO, they can go ahead and comply with it, and there's nothing the city or anybody can do to stop them. And I acknowledge my vast ignorance around this stuff, but why don't we just tighten up the UDO? Yes, and I understand that ensures that we'll be doing the lawyer dance. But that takes a lot of time, and maybe slow is good, and maybe that's a good end in and of itself. Thank you very much.
Mr. Henley, could you speak to the part about it's easier or harder or that type thing?
I sure can. Thank you, Mayor. I'd apologize if it was conveyed that it was easier. It is not. It is actually a lot harder on staff, on the planning board, on the Board of Aldermen, compared to an administrative or by right project, because there's a lot more, it's just a much different type of review. You're not reviewing it for its compliance with the Unified Development Ordinance and specific standards that are incorporated within it. You're reviewing it for its compliance with that document and with the goals, policies, and objectives within the comprehensive plan or the land use plan and any other adopted plan that may or may not be relevant. And in the context of public input meetings and public hearings that occur earlier on in the process than just in front of the alderman, that also are themselves a specific review criterion for conditional rezonings. So they are, it's not intended to be easier on staff. It's definitely harder on staff. The only way in which there's any semblance of it being easier is it's easier to accomplish the goals and objectives of your land use plan. The land use plan today talks about going above and beyond in terms of open space preservation, in terms of environmental protection. And conditional zoning, as the draft is written, is a way to do that while also ensuring that it would be possible to accomplish the same thing in the Unified Development Ordinance by putting into place things like conservation subdivision ordinances and similar processes like that. However, when you do that and you make it an administrative process, then you take the public out of it again. And so while a conservation subdivision, for example, which a conservation subdivision is essentially a development in which around half, if not more, of the entire tract is preserved as open space forever as part of the review. That may make sense on one property, but it may not on another property based on the public input that we hear. But we've heard just in the 8.5 months that I've been with Southport, there's been projects that have met all the standards of the UDO, and yet the community around it still does not like it. And they come to staff, they come to the planning board, come to the aldermen, and say, what can we do about it? How can we make this better? And the answer is, well, we can try, we can ask them, but if they say no, and we deny the project based on that, we've put the entire community in serious legal jeopardy in which we would almost certainly lose. So.
Travis, is this easier for the developer?
No. They have lost, compared to the by right process, they lose all of those protections. The board has broad discretion to deny a project that even is a slam dunk in terms of consistency with your adopted plans. If the public input is no, this does not work for this site, there is the board's cover to deny the project.
Travis, can you explain to all of us the difference between conditional zoning and a PUD with a development agreement?
There's effectively nothing. The way the PUD process is set up, it is conditional zoning. It's just not called conditional zoning. It is, the PUD process requires a rezoning to the PUD district and the submission of a master development plan that comes with conditions. That is a conditional rezoning. It's just Southport hasn't called it that in the past. It used to be known as a different, so if you go back and look at the approval documents for Cades Cove or cottages at Price's Creek, those were done under a planned residential development process, which also was effectively conditional rezoning. The difference really between PUD and conditional zoning as the draft is currently written is what the applicant can ask for to be considered. It guarantees nothing in terms of what could be approved.
But they can ask for a PUD today.
They certainly can, absolutely.
Okay.
Given our current UDO, Travis, it's true that if they did apply for PUD, the UDO requires that, for instance, in R20, any new lots created under the PUD could not be less than 12,000 square feet in R20. But with conditional zoning, we could, in fact, make those lots smaller.
If it made sense for the project, yes. The applicant could request to go smaller than 12,000, but it would be up to the course of the review process and the public input that we hear to determine whether that's appropriate or not. Maybe smaller than 12,000 is appropriate in some parts of the project and not others. Maybe adjacent to a development next door with acre lots, those lots adjacent to those lots would also be acre lots, and the smaller lots would be somewhere else in the project.
And that doesn't guarantee that you're going to have more homes.
No.
It's just that you're condensing them so you have more open space.
Correct. Which is, for your PUD ordinance today, it is written to try to incentivize that already. However, by mandating a minimum amount of open space and then also setting a floor in terms of how much you can cluster, you create an intersection point for the engineer or the landscape architect who's designing the project, to where they can only preserve so much open space and still make the project work from a financial standpoint. Whereas if they could cluster further, they could potentially provide more protected open space in the design.
And I don't know the answer to this, so I'm asking a question. I really am asking a question. In our UDO, our open space is not defined. There's no breakdown between an overgrown piece of woods and an active open space, is there?
Off the top of my head, no, I don't believe there is.
So I could just have an open space and have woods so dense, and there's a number of them in this area, that you can't walk through, as opposed to people thinking they're going to get like a park, or they're going to get walkways or anything else. If we agree to open space, X number of acres of open space, whatever it is, we can't go beyond that by telling them they have to have something else in the open space, because the UDO says that's what they all have to, that's all they have to ask for.
Yes, to an extent, yes. There's going to be some instances, though, where the unimproved open space is actually going to be what you want, especially if the open space you're trying to provide is to take into account, long-term environmental trends, trying to reduce flooding, that sort of thing. We would want those areas to remain as native as possible. We would not want there to be significant investment on the part of the applicant or on the part of the future HOA to improve those areas if they're just going to be
well, that may be, but right now, under the current UDO, if I'm hearing you correctly, we could not have that as one of our conditions.
Oh, you certainly could through a conditional rezoning process. You absolutely could.
Right now.
Right now, I see what you're saying. Without the UDO in front of me, I'd want to check the UDO to make sure before I said one way or another.
Thank you, sir.
But
Sure.
you want to say something? Go ahead.
Well, I do, because, one of the things that we've heard over and over again is that we want to preserve the environment, we want to protect the animals, we want to do all of these things. Yeah, our tree ordinance is important to us. So some of the commentary that we've received from development applications are all of those things. So I'm not sure why we'd want to differentiate improved open space versus unimproved open space, or I mean, to me, that's getting into the weeds a little bit, because everybody out here has said, I remember the young lady who stood up here and talked about the animals, during one of those application conversations. So, we can't say that those things are important to us and then say we also want, you to improve it and, give us a park and walking trails and allow us to disturb the land that we just argued we wanted to save. I don't know.
For clarity, a PUD, planned unit development, there's a minimum amount of open space required. There's no maximum, however. We can ask for and refuse to accept less than, say, 40%. Well, you used 50% as the example earlier. We could, and if they didn't agree to it, we don't have to approve it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions right now for Mr. Henley? Okay. Madam Clerk, who's next?
Karen Rife.
My name is Karen R. Rife, and I live on Dutchman Creek Road in Southport. And aren't you glad I just have a little notepad here this time? So mine are just follow-ups on some questions and things that were asked at the open meeting. Number one, Dora, you did a great job of explaining what legislative was versus administrative, and I failed to take it one step further to say, can you give us an example of how a legislative issue would be, what that would be that would come up, that would then now you could go, okay, I can pass this easier. So has anybody got an answer to that, Travis? Poor Travis wasn't here, so he didn't get it. Did you watch the meeting, Travis?
I did watch the meeting, and there was, I was thankful that I had gone to the grocery store and gotten popcorn before I did. Just to make sure I understand the question, you're talking about the difference between administrative versus legislative and how a legislative decision would play out.
Correct, because most of them shook their heads yes, that is the reason why they were leaning some of them towards CZ, because it became more legislative versus administrative.
So legislative is a policy level decision. They have essentially the board as the ultimate decision maker, but the planning board too, they have much higher amounts of discretion. They have the same discretion in a conditional rezoning that they have in terms of whether or not to add conditional rezonings to the ordinance. It is a broad level policy discussion where they can incorporate any number of review criteria into their decision making, as opposed to an administrative process where if it checks the boxes of the UDO, that's it.
Right, and that's what Dory explained that time. So say that a potential developer comes to you with a plan, and in it, potential developer comes to you with a plan, and in it, there's something that now, it's now not administrative, it very clearly is legislative. Okay, that's easy, I can vote on that. So that's what I'm asking.
Yes, so it would have to be submitted as a conditional rezoning or some other, whatever other legislative type of proposal in order for it to be legislative. There isn't if somebody submits, take Oakton that we just dealt with. They submitted Oakton as a by right preliminary plat. There is no scenario in which that process can become legislative. They would have to have submitted a PUD or a conditional rezoning or some other form of legislative process in order for the board to have that discretion.
But I'm just asking, as like gentleman said earlier, we're all lay people that don't understand all this. So I'll just say somebody comes and says, I want to make a pool in that neighborhood. So is there something that is so clear when it's a CZ versus the current PUD or UDO that it's like, okay, that's easy. That is now very clear legislative. I can vote on that. That's what I'm asking. Everybody's looking at me like, what?
I feel like we're two ships passing each other without acknowledging each other. Yes, when an applicant comes and sits down with us and says, this is my idea, it's going to be very easy to say whether it fits into the zoning of the property or not. And so based on an applicant coming to staff and saying, this is what I want to do, that's where myself or Mo or whoever else is involved in the discussion is going to say, okay, that can be accomplished via the existing zoning or conditional zoning, or the PUD is going to have to be the process to follow to do that project. So if they wanted the pool, for example, and the zoning did not allow for a pool, they're going to have to rezone the property one way or another.
Okay, now I get it. All right. Next. You can stay here.
Okay.
All right. The next one, we also asked about if a project is approved and then the builder sells the property and it's approved under a CZ, then it becomes deeded, what we understood, as that is what the new purchaser would be buying into. But if they decide, no, I don't want to do, part A and B have been done, but I'm not doing C, they have to come back through the process again and reapply and go through everything. So we understood that correctly last time. Yes. Okay, and the final question I had, you just said earlier, CZ and PUD are almost the same? And we asked last time, well, then will PUD just go away? Or is PUD, because, as you've said many times to me in private meetings and to a group of us, it is a very tedious process to go through CZ and has to be requested by the developer. Why would they go CZ if they could still do PUD, if PUD is still out there?
I think I need a microphone. Why would they request PUD if CZ existed? Why would they request CZ if PUD was still there? Well, that'll be up to the individual calculus of the developer or property owner who wants to build something. If they want to follow our PUD process, then so be it. If they want to follow CZ, then so be it. That's their decision as a property owner. From a planning perspective, it would be helpful to have the PUD process still in the ordinance, if for nothing else than that it's something to look back on to see how other projects were reviewed and approved. I can tell you from experience that the old planned residential development process and how that was done versus what's in place now is Cades Cove is having quite a bit of interesting conversations with regard to how the project was originally approved versus what they have to do now with their current project. And so, but in terms of, to answer your question, it's going to be up to the property owner.
Travis, I think one of the simplest things that we just touched on was the lot size. So, you know, the size of the lot in our current UDO, PUD may not be the right direction for a developer who wanted a lot in an R20 zoned area, but wanted a lot that was smaller than 12,000 square feet, right? So that would move them towards CZ versus PUD. That's just one small example.
That's exactly, that's just one small example. There could be if it's a mixed use project that incorporates commercial, there could be a use that they want to incorporate into their project that the PUD zoning district does not allow for. And because they want that additional use, they would want to request, for example, if somebody wanted to incorporate a community pool into their development project, when I mean community pool, I mean open to the entire community. If it's an indoor pool, it would be allowed via PUD. If it's an outdoor pool, it's not permitted in PUD. So then conditional zoning would be the route that they would choose.
Could PUD be eliminated, or wouldn't you would suggest that?
It could be down the road. I'm certainly not proposing to eliminate
Would
it.
there be any advantage to getting rid of PUD?
I don't think that there would be until years down the road when we've had a chance to examine what has happened. If the board chooses to ultimately adopt conditional zoning.
Travis, since you brought up Oakton. When Oakton was going through the process, PUD was available to them, correct?
Yes, it was.
And let's assume, and they chose not to go that way. Mm-hmm. And if Oakton was to redo their thing and there was CZ, then they choose not to do that, we'd still be in the same case of, did they check all the boxes, and we have to go with what happened. So adding CZ does not necessarily mean that the outcome of Oakton or an Oakton-like project would be changed in any way, because they chose not to go PUD. They could choose not to go CZ because they had something in their minds, and it was stay with the zoning that they had and move forward with that. I just want to make sure everybody understands that just because if we threw CZ into it, or had it existed back then, that Oakton would have had an absolute different outcome.
I thought it was, Mayor Pro Tem, you correct me, that it was the developer that chose the conditional zoning path. So, you see what I'm saying? I thought I heard you say that in the beginning. It's
Yes,
the developer
and-
that would choose it, so, whether it's available or not, they didn't choose it. Of course, it wouldn't affect Oakton because they didn't choose it.
And also, Alderman Alt, unfortunately, Thomas Lloyd is not with us, but I do think in the beginning, because Oakton, I think, started back in 21, if I'm remembering right, that's when they submitted their original application. Anyway, the reason that they did not go PUD was because of the 20% open space requirement. Had they had a CZ option, they may have come and then they could have participated in a conditional zoning option where, because they're in town, they're a smaller project, they had some wetlands, maybe we could have recognized better merits about the submittal. So, but that, to me, that's what I remember hearing from the beginning and why they went by right, R10 by right, because the hammocks is a PUD, the adjacent property.
Yeah, but when, and I don't know if any of us even has this memory of it, but when they were asking about the PUD and it was the 20% of open space, were they doing it with the same by right number of residential units that they had? They just want to rearrange them somehow? Or were they asking for more, I'm going to use that magic word, density, more residential units on the same amount of acreage?
They didn't submit it that way because they did not want to do the 20% of open space. So I suspect they weren't doing more units. They would have made it denser, meaning smaller lots, but they didn't want to do the 20%. But since they didn't submit it, I don't really know more than that.
Thank you.
About Oakton, I can't believe there's anything left to say about Oakton after 2 long meetings about it. But Travis, would you clarify, going back to the difference between administrative and legislative, what we actually voted on when we finally got around to voting?
Yeah, so essentially the board's vote with Oakton is as what happened a couple months ago. It was a certification that the project had met all the standards that the UDO had laid out for them to meet.
Basically, we were approving the checklist that...
For lack of a better way to describe it, yes.
And there's been a lot of discussion about that checklist.
Yes, there has been. Essentially to the standpoint that now when you have those administrative projects coming forward, the planning board, since they see everything first before you do, receives staff's checklist in terms of, okay, staff reviewed, did they identify all of their buffers correctly? Did they identify all of their rights of way correctly? Did they, so on and so forth down the list, and that's what's provided to the
Well, I guess what I
planning
was,
board.
and I'm sorry because I was not very articulate in my statement. What I was referring to in my head was that the staff has a number of changes in the checklist they would like to have. The planning board has said they have a number of changes that they would like to have. Aldermen have said there's a number of changes that they would like to have. And out of all those changes, this is the one we're going forward with.
This is the one I was directed to bring forward, yes.
Yes. Thank you.
I think this is, Oakton revealed for us, certainly for me, the need for some text amendments so that that checklist does include things that we would like to have.
That sounds like a good opportunity to just provide for the record that the request for qualifications for the new comprehensive plan went out earlier this week. That planning process is going to involve probably the most robust public input process or public input outreach program that this community's ever seen. And because it has to, in order for it to be an effective plan that you can use and not just adopt it and put it on the shelf and forget about it, it has to include that. And then once that process is done, the immediate next step is a comprehensive look at your UDO. And the reason for that is the comp plan sets the goals, objectives, and policies for everything land use. And so we can take a look at the UDO now, and I'm not saying any of this to say that we shouldn't. However, if we're amending the UDO now and then our comp plan, that will be done, and hopefully, that's not wood, but it'll have to do, very, very quickly. What if the input we receive says something different? Then we're just back to changing the UDO again to flip things backwards.
Oh, I totally agree with you, and I've said it many times, that in my mind, the process is we do the comprehensive plan to figure out what we want the city to feel and look like, and the UDO allows us then to implement that plan. It gives us the tools to do that. You don't change the toolkit before you know what you want the house to be. So to me, we should slow down, since we are told that this has nothing to do with any development that may be out there. So let's do the comprehensive plan, let's change the UDO, let's do it systematically and do it right, instead of having meetings in which overwhelmingly the number of people who come in here are against this particular text amendment.
Anybody know of a 3-story building with a rooftop deck that was proposed on House Street? Just a quick show of hands. Okay. If we don't make changes now, and this has nothing to do with, this is outside of conditional zoning, but if we don't make changes to the UDO in a timely manner, that kind of activity would continue to happen. And this board made sure that that's not going to happen again. It's too late. You know, frankly, I wish that it had been done sooner. I wish that we had anticipated what someone would do to our beautiful little downtown. But we can't wait around. That's just not the answer.
And back to dear old Oakton. Sorry, last time I'm going to talk about Oakton. What became clear and was surprising to me, we had great concerns about the drainage and what would happen to particularly Fodale, where drainage from the hammocks is already a big problem, and flooding, and we're very concerned about what will this do? How will that add to it? And there was no way we could be sure, because at that stage of what we were looking at, the developer did not have to show us what the final plan was, and the engineers had not had a chance to see it and approve it. That's a checklist item that should have been there, and the way we would be able to add it would be with a text amendment. That's not something that would be dependent on a new comprehensive plan. Am I correct?
Yeah, that statement I made earlier was in no way trying to say that we should not do any text amendments until the comp plan is done. It was more just being careful and being mindful of the input that we're going to get through the comp plan process. We don't want to go against what that eventual input would be just to then flip back the other way. I think this process of reviewing conditional zoning, though, has given us a lot of public input already, so we're off and running already.
So, Travis, since we adopted, you weren't here, of course, but since we adopted the revised UDO in whenever it was, 2020, I think, How many text amendments have we had? Isn't it 7 or 8 or something? Does anybody know? Somewhere in that range.
The city planner, Mo Meehan, is saying 6 or 7.
6 or 7. So in fact, this is not the first amendment to the UDO that we're making. It's far from the first. It's the 6th or 7th, would be the 7th or 8th. So.
Wes McLeod, Cape Fear Council of Governments, and Alderman Allen, just to your point, when ultimately the UDO was adopted and all along the process, because I was involved in it, we were very clear that there will be a number of items that are going to be further addressed because you can't possibly contemplate all of the particulars that may happen. As far as the downtown project that occurred, when the UDO was updated, the goal was for there to be redevelopment downtown. And that was ultimately what happened. But it wasn't the type of redevelopment that you guys wanted. So I just wanted to point that out. And this is probably going to be not necessarily a comment that everyone is going to take kindly, but if folks are upset by development occurring in any fashion, I don't care how many times you update the UDO, 1,000,000 times, you are not going to solve that problem. And so that is something that this city, other local governments across the region are having to struggle through. I mean, we have local governments where there's been de-annexation bills filed because of actions taken on behalf of the local government to try to stop development. So I just want to point that out. And so happy to answer any other question about the previous UDO. And I'm not saying this to try to scare you, but folks must understand that the house that you got and that you live in now was developed ultimately, correct? So, and I know that's something that's difficult for you guys as elected officials to have to answer the question of your constituents.
Wes, I think this board is absolutely united on the fact that when we were talking about another development, and the people who came in and said, no, we don't want you to develop it at all, that was clearly, we all just rejected that idea. That's not even on the table. They have rights. You bought the land. You can build to the rights that you have. Now, tinkering with all of that is where we're talking about now, as opposed to, I got here first and you're not coming second.
And I think that's critical because you all know that the action that's happening in the legislature, they are telling us all that, folks, you need to let some of this happen or we're going to tell you how it's going to happen and you're not going to have a say in the matter, which is that is what we absolutely don't want, right? So it's trying to strike the appropriate balance between the two.
Oh, absolutely. This legislative session was a wake-up call. And we were able to, you were able to convince them that we didn't need to be woken up quite that sharply right now. The citizens changed that whole thing. So you're right. We're going to have to make sure that we treat people fairly.
Wes, I've got something, and because give Travis a break. Conditional zoning is a tool that would allow the community to consider projects that introduce specific urban planning design elements not provided for in our current traditional zoning.
Sure, certainly, but a host of other things. I'll just point out one of the differences between PUD and conditional zoning is the fact that conditional zoning is strictly, it says it in our general statutes, and so I feel more comfortable about having a regulation like that in place. But to your point, yes, you absolutely can put urban planning principles. You can do all kinds of things. You know, you guys say that there's a project and there's a grove of trees that you want. Say that will be protected forever. Boom, done as part of a condition of a conditional zoning request. That's a simple one.
It gives us a freedom that we don't get from traditional zoning.
That's correct.
And it is in line when we go to our comprehensive plan, plan for the future, and the smart development principles. It gives us a way to apply these in a real way.
That's correct. I mean, ultimately, the developer is going to come, or the applicant is going to come with their idea, which gets further shaped at the planning board level, and then, well, first by staff, then by planning board, and then ultimately by you all. And if by the time it gets to you guys, it's a non-starter, then that's the end of it. You say no, and they come back with a new proposal at some point in time, or they're just done. That's sort of how it works.
Wes, with regards to PUD, a development agreement cannot overcome restrictions within the UDO.
That's correct. The only thing that development and your attorney's here, so he can answer these questions as well, but the only thing the development agreement could do is if there's an administrative decision type and it goes, for example, to the planning board, the development agreements could say, well, those administrative decisions for this particular thing are going to get approved by staff. But you have to abide by the rules of the UDO at the time of the development agreement being enacted. I don't know if the attorney wants to add to that.
So specifically in an R20 zoned neighborhood, if we wanted to allow 7,000 square foot lots and the UDO says that they have to be 60% of that current zoning, we could not do that. We could not overcome that even with the development agreement.
That's correct. You'd have to amend the ordinance in some fashion.
Yeah.
In terms of the development agreement is not just an agreement between two parties to say, hey, I want to do this, can you let me do this? The developer asks the city, I want 7,000 square foot lots, but I'm only allowed to have 12,000. The development agreement, the purpose of it is to protect the vested rights of the developer for a greater period of time than is afforded normally by statute. Typically 20 or 25 years. It may specify some partnerships on infrastructure, host of other things. The only thing that the rules that can be from a development standpoint that can be flexible is again, say a subdivision within that development is typically supposed to be approved by the planning board. The development agreement can say, hey, look, we've approved this development agreement legislatively. We understand what's going to be built, and given that, we're fine with the subdivision within this development coming only to staff and not to planning board. Because we've already granted you permission, the citizenry has already discussed it, etc. Does that help answer the question?
Alderman Davis, my point was that we can't contradict, our agreement with the developer cannot contradict the UDO and the guidelines of the UDO. So even if we wanted to approve 6,000 square foot lots in a subdivision that required 12,000, we couldn't do that without a text amendment. With a PUD, correct. With conditional zoning, we have the flexibility to do that.
But you do have the ability under a PUD to put multifamily units together.
Yes, I believe under the terms of your PUD ordinance.
So we could still have 20 residential units per acre under a PUD with a conditional zoning agreement?
No. I think you can only have 6 units per acre.
Yes,
You
it's
can
6
only have
units.
6 overall. but
6
you
units
could
per
have
acre.
areas where you could have 20. As long as you had your total acreage, because we went round and round with that with one of the local developers. Because in one area, they were having, I believe, 20 residential units per parking lot. But the rest of the place, the rest of the 376 acres, was going to be an average of 6 or 7.
I believe it's averaged across the entirety of
It's the entire project.
Right.
So as long as the entire project was under 6 units an acre, phase 2 over here, that's multifamily, may be 20 units an acre here.
Okay.
But phase 3 on the other side may be 0.5 units an acre. And so it balances out to eventually be under 6 units an acre.
Well, my point is that if you wanted little tiny houses and lots of lots and lots of little tiny houses under little tiny lots, as long as the walls are touching each other, you could have that.
You could ask for it, yes.
Under a PUD.
Through, go ahead.
With PUD, you couldn't because the lot size couldn't be less than 12,000 square feet. It'd have to be a multifamily type
Well,
use.
I guess what I'm saying is that you could build a multifamily unit that would have that many units in it. Okay, thank you.
Your land use plan would also tell you whether or not those types of uses would be appropriate in those areas or not.
Huh?
So,
I thought multifamily was 11 per acre.
that's based on the multifamily zoning, if that applies.
I think PUD says 6 units an acre max
Well, yes, over the entire tract, but the multifamily standards,
for the land use plan.
well, yes,
Yeah.
for areas that support multifamily.
Any other questions before we go to the next speaker?
Tracy O'Brien.
Thank you. Try that again. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and the Board of Aldermen. My name is Tracy O'Brien, and I live on Cottage Creek Road in Southport. So I've followed closely the many meetings regarding the proposed adoption of what we're discussing tonight is obviously CZ, conditional zoning. After careful review of the purported advantages of this, promoted by the board members, some of the board members, as well as the disadvantages that have been outlined by a multitude of citizens against it. It seems crystal clear that conditional zoning would be detrimental to the citizens of Southport and our families. Conditional zoning seems it gives far too much power and discretion to the board and is subjective, as we've been discussing most through this conversation about CZ. And again, to mirror what was said earlier, we need standards. Standards should be closely examined, updated as soon as possible, like you had just discussed, and eliminate the loopholes, and should be consistent with the comprehensive plan, which also needs updating. I've heard the argument that under CZ, the Board of Aldermen can always vote no, we heard it again tonight, of a plan, but the subjectivity lies with the whims of the existing board at that time. Therefore, I would please urge you all to vote a resounding no to adopting this conditional zoning. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Laura Sharkey.
Welcome, Ms. Sharkey.
My name is Laura Sharkey. I reside at 432 Cades Trail. First, I want to say congratulations to Travis and Wes and any other staff members here tonight that are taking a yeoman's effort to answer all these questions on the spot. They're doing an excellent job of clarifying things. They're trying their best to make it very clear the differences between traditional zoning and this idea of conditional zoning. I commend them because it's a long day that they've worked and now they're here having to do this, you know, and it's really a testament to their professionalism. My point is, when I was on the board of aldermen and we were going through the updated UDO process, the conditional zoning section was added. It was part of the UDO, and I was quite excited about it, and I thought it was a positive thing because we could get some specific conditions with particular lots or places in town that we were concerned about when there was proposed development. It wouldn't just give us that standardized checklist of things that if they met it on their plan, then we had to approve it. I thought that was a positive thing. The fact that it's already in place for commercial is a positive thing. So I think we need to move forward and open up the door to conditional zoning for residential zones. And I'm going to use this quote from the UNC School of Government professor David Owens that explains in a nutshell why I support the proposed amendment. In sum, conditional zoning is a valuable tool that allows development regulations to be carefully tailored to individual sites and particular development schemes. It allows reasoned negotiation and appropriate balancing of landowner, neighborhood, and governmental interests. Properly applied, it serves the legitimate interests of all involved. Thanks a lot.
Stephen Carpenter.
Mayor, Alderman, my name's Stephen Carpenter. I'm actually from Surf City, North Carolina, but I spent a lot of time over on Charlotte Street in Holden Beach, and I have a long-standing connections to the community. I am a professional planner with 25 years of experience, half in the public sector, half in the private sector. I'm not here as an expert on conditional zoning. I have never implemented a conditional zoning ordinance. I haven't read your conditional zoning ordinance. I'm here for general knowledge about planning and development. There's a difference between strategic planning and comprehensive planning. I think we've touched on it on a few meetings. Strategic planning being more of a 5-year process, comprehensive planning being more of a 20 long-term process. I would think that CZ zoning would fall underneath that comprehensive planning process. Maybe a bike trail, nature trail would fall under the strategic process. For that reason, I don't know if the Coastal Resources Commission has been involved. I don't know if Division of Coastal Management has been involved in the writing of this text. I would hope that they would have. Whenever I started in Pender County, they didn't have a zoning ordinance. They didn't even have a subdivision ordinance. We had to come up with all brand new text. And one of the things that we wanted to focus on was precision of language, and we never wanted to write an ordinance that we couldn't implement and that we couldn't enforce. We wanted every word in that ordinance to be tailored to the health, safety, and general welfare of that community. We also wanted developers to know what was expected of them when they came into the community very clearly. And thirdly, we wanted to make sure that we could defend that ordinance in a court of law. Now, with conditional zoning, the flexibility is what gives it its power, but that flexibility also leads to vagueness, and vagueness for the developer and for staff can be a problem. We heard a lady talk about objective versus subjective. And since we had a sports figure, I'll use a little sports analogy. In football, if you're out of bounds, you're out of bounds. It's very objective. You're either in bounds or you're out of bounds. Holding, throw the flag on holding, that's one individual's objective on that one play. He was holding this play, he wasn't holding that play. But somebody has to make that call. And that's what you're doing here. R20, a permitted use, very objective. You're in bounds or you're out of bounds. Now we're talking about conditional zoning. We're talking about holding. Well, I think it's in bounds. Well, no, I think it's out of bounds. I think it's holding. Who's going to make that decision? Ultimately, there's going to have to be somebody that makes that decision. And if one person, if a board, or if anybody makes a decision for one party against another party, there's going to be inherent bias. Now, is that bias justified? Are the people really doing good? Or are they doing bad? That's not for us to say. But it can be perceived as bias regardless. And are you comfortable with letting staff or future boards decide who's going to throw that flag? I heard a lot of people saying here, we can ask for or we can grant. That language is very close to contract zoning. And when you say, well, we want to ask for this and we can grant you this if you give us that, that's okay for the first guy that's in the door. Now the next guy that comes in the door, we're not going to do it for you because you don't meet these conditions. Well, you did it for developer one. Too bad. Well, now I'm going to sue you. On the development side, if I was to come into your community and you had a PUD and you had a CZ and you had an R20 zoning, the first thing I'm going to do is set up a spreadsheet and I'm going to see which one gives me the most lots that I can possibly get out of it. I'm not looking at how can I provide you with the most open space. I'm not looking at how can I do what's best for this community. I'm looking at what can put the most dollars in the developers' pockets. And to think that they don't operate like that is fooling yourself, because they do operate like that, because I've been there. And just to clarify, I have no financial bearing or anything in this community. I have no dog in the hunt as far as this is concerned. And we also heard somebody talk about, well, if there's PUD, why would they do CZ? And it goes back to what I'm talking about. You're not underneath somebody's jurisdiction until you put yourself under their jurisdiction. If I don't apply for CZ, I don't have to be held to CZ. And if you have a PUD already, then why do you need the CZ? It doesn't really make sense to me. We heard a little bit about revertment, whenever developer A, B, and C, first developer comes in, he does A, B, and C, but he doesn't want to do D now. And you say, well, you have to go back to R20. Well, no, they're just going to sue you. They're not going to do what you say and reapply for everything. They're just going to come back and sue you. You have a good ordinance, you have a good PUD, your neighborhoods look great, your storefronts look great, your downtown looks great. I caution you to not let perfection be the enemy of good. You have a good ordinance. Don't make it so convoluted and hard to understand that it gets you sued. And I don't know if you have any questions. I haven't talked in a while, so I talked a little quickly there, but if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you. I have a question.
Hang on. Mayor, I have a couple of questions. They're not for Mr. Carpenter, but
Absolutely.
they're related to his topic. Travis, can I ask you a question? We've heard this before, that CZ is too vague. It's supposed to be, right? That's the whole point. It's conditional zoning. We come up with the conditions. If the conditions were in place beforehand, it wouldn't be vague, but it wouldn't be conditional zoning either. It's vague on purpose, right?
That is correct. The vagueness is intentional, and the conditional zoning is in reference, one, to the conditions of approval, but also to the conditions of the property and the property that's around it. It's all different. Even in a straight rezoning, a general use rezoning, you're looking at the property's relationship to what's around it and to your comprehensive plan, and ultimately coming to a policy level decision. In that aspect, conditional zoning is no different than that.
Thank you. And Mr. Herman, can you address the issue of legality of conditional zoning, especially as it relates to spot zoning and contract zoning?
Well, in terms of contract zoning, that's usually applied to general rezoning as one of the public comments mentioned, the whole point of conditional rezoning is there is some form of negotiation involved depending on which stage it's at. So I guess, and then just from a policy standpoint, when you make legislative decisions, unless those decisions are just arbitrary and capricious, just completely in bad faith by the board, typically courts will go and uphold those decisions because they won't go and interfere with discretion of legislative power, so to speak.
Thank you.
Also, Travis, I have a question. Just because I think the question of something being set as a precedent from one project to the next, could you address that?
Certainly. I don't see conditional zoning as being possible to set a precedent because one of the review criteria for conditional rezonings is public input. And the public input of a project in this part of the community and a public input on a project that's in this part of the community, even if you held everything else constant, is going to be different. So the board may come to an approval decision on one project and the exact same project in a different part of town, even if it's the exact same project, may not make sense over there, and the board can choose to adopt a consistency statement that says, although it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, its denial is reasonable and in the public interest because X, Y, and Z, and make that decision. And I mean, the courts have upheld plenty of those decisions over the years that different communities have made. Brady, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there, but.
And doesn't the CZ ordinance itself references the uniqueness of each project and parcel, correct?
It's, yes.
So, I mean, it's
very intentional in its design.
Exactly. So if every project is unique and different, then there's no way you can set some sort of precedent.
And I would add too, and I know I've said this in other times, but in terms of what our UDO allows versus what it doesn't allow, I mean, you look around at our downtown and the residential areas that surround it. I mean, all of those areas were created before zoning was ever even thought of here. So, and to take it even further than that, all of your R10 lots that are considered non-conforming down here, they are effectively conditional zoning districts because the setbacks are not, R10 has defined 25-foot front, 20 rear, and 8-foot setbacks on each side of a building. But we've designed the R10 district to say if you're non-conforming, instead of having to apply to those setbacks, you can reduce them by proportion of how non-conforming you are, and then your front setback is based on the average of the rest of the structures along that block. That is effectively conditional zoning right there, and the ordinance has been set up that way for some time. So.
Travis, would you explain the term non-conforming in the way you're using it?
Yes, non-conforming, legal non-conforming, to be more specific, is a structure or a use or some other land use related thing related to a property that was legal when it was established but then became illegal. And so effectively all of downtown Southport, certainly the residential areas, are considered legal nonconformities because they were originally constructed without zoning at all, and then R10 was placed over top of them.
So in other words, among other things, an R10 lot that's not 10,000 square feet but is 7,000 square feet is by its nature non-conforming.
Correct. Still buildable, but non-conforming.
Mr. Mayor, and I'm guilty of this, so I'm going to tell you. I think I have been taking up too much time, and we're dragging this out, and the citizens need to have their questions asked first, and maybe we could respond at the end to all of their questions, or let them speak up first, because I don't want them to leave.
No, they're not going to leave, and I think we're striking a good balance, and I appreciate that.
I do have one other.
Yes.
Travis, just another reason for CZ or for a developer to move to CZ is if they were outside of city limits and wanted to be annexed, correct?
Correct.
And then that gives us an opportunity to negotiate with those people.
Correct.
Okay, because this is the public hearing back and forth. The gentleman spoke, created multiple ideas, questions, and that type of thing. So that's what we want. So I know it's long and drawn out, but I want to hear from everyone, and we will. But that's just part of the process, the back and forth. Whereas with public comment, they just come up and speak, and then that's it. So who's next, Madam Clerk? But I appreciate your point, sir, and I'll try to move things along.
I do not have anybody else signed up, but I do have 3 comments to read, so I don't know if anybody wants to.
Is there anyone that would like to speak before we do the comments? Mr. Bandera, please.
Sorry about that. I'm Rich Bandera. I live at 409 North Burrington Ave in Southport. And I came to the last, I guess it was a special meeting, and I had a couple big questions in that. The city manager asked if there was any questions, and if we couldn't give you an answer then, we would find out the answer tonight. So my question was, they did a research about different smaller towns that had conditional zoning, and Travis and Mo did their research on that. But one of the big things that popped out at that last planning board meeting, not the special meeting, but was that Oak Island and Sunset Beach do not have conditional zoning. In fact, the text that was presented said it's prohibited on the residential area of the island. And so I asked the question, why? And I have an idea why, my personal opinion on that. But so, do you have an answer to that? That's one, but I have a couple other things, so let me just finish up. The other thing is that I think this is speaking more to Mr. Lombardi. I think you're of the understanding that under conditional zoning, density can't be increased, but the way the land use map exists right now, and it can be increased. And you thought that maybe detached structures in different lots, as opposed to clustered development, the density couldn't change, but it can change. Under the low density district, under the land use map and the R20 overlay that exists now, you can go from 2 units that would be under the R20 per acre would only allow 2 units per acre. Under the land use plan, it would allow 3 units per acre. So I've said that, I don't know how you can stay awake listening to me anymore, but.
Would it have to be approved?
No, it would be a staff recommendation that could get approved. They recommend it to you that you'd have to, they would meet the standard of the land use map as a recommendation that meets that standard, and you can say no to it, but if you're thinking that density under the land use map can't be increased, it can be increased.
But you would still have to approve it, is what
But you've got a guide. You can say no to everything then. You can say no to whatever you want, but I'm just saying to you that under that conditional zoning process, staff would look at that and say, they could say, we don't like it for a lot of different reasons, but there's latitude to increase density. So I just wanted to make that point. The last point I want to make is, and this is a bigger thing, and I think this is kind of, we're heading into the election season, all that stuff, candidates are filing, but I just want to pull this thing up really quick, if you don't mind me delaying this for a second. Under the text of the land, or the text of this amendment, it has language in there, because this is such a sensitive topic politically, because the legislative side of conditional zoning, that during the election season, and I'm going to read this to you, The Board of Aldermen may not vote to rezone proper to conditional zoning district during the time period beginning on the date of the municipal general election, including on the date, basically what it's saying, when the new board is sworn in. So if an applicant comes in, you know, during that period of time, you couldn't really vote on it, you know, between that period. So if we're talking about like a specific application, but I don't know if we're technically into the election season, you know, but the candidate are allowed to file and that kind of thing. But you're talking about adopting the entire language of it in what amounts to an election season. And I really feel that you should put this off until after the election. I've always felt that you should table this, if anything else, and just kind of put this to pasture. I mean, that's my own 2 cents on it, but I think the language of what the text amendment says is kind of, you got to be careful because how sensitive this stuff is politically. And I'll let Wes kind of address the first item I had about the. Pardon me? Well, but what I'm getting, I'm not saying that would happen, but it's so politically susceptible. Under this kind of period of time where we are in the year, that how can you adopt an ordinance when it's so politically charged? That's what I would say. And the first point I wanted to ask with Wes was about why Oak Island and Sunset Beach have it in residential districts. So, thank you.
Both Sunset Beach and the town of Oak Island, they have a provision that doesn't allow someone to apply for conditional zoning within the island proper portion of the town within a residential district because all the lots are platted. And so the acreage threshold is effectively null. And there was concerns over folks using conditional zoning to bifurcate the traditional variance process. And so certainly, I mean, I believe here there's an acreage threshold drafted currently, 5 acres. So it would take a lot of combining lots in your downtown area to get that 5 acres. But that's the reason why Sunset Beach just approved their first conditional zoning application this past Monday after almost a period of 3 years with a development contingent in the town of Sea Trail. This was also in relationship to the legislation that Frank Eiler filed to de-annex a significant portion of the town. In fact, he was there on Monday evening at that council meeting when it was ultimately approved. Not everyone was satisfied, but ultimately the appropriate balance was struck so that the council could feel okay with approving the series of proposals that they had before them. And they did so ultimately because they had certainty about what was going to be built. And even if it doesn't get built, they knew that those were the only things that can be built on these series of tracks. And so they finally made that decision.
Wes, are there other zoning actions that are related to elections and that sort of thing?
So that provision is similar to no. You don't have to have that provision in place if you don't want. In communities that process a lot of conditional zoning requests, it's a provision that's quite common in their ordinance. City of Wilmington, for example, everybody knows that they have to get their CZ request in so that they don't come under fire with the municipal election provision. So it's up to you all whether or not you want to have it.
And just to be clear, that language was already in the ordinance for conditional zoning. That's not part of this. That stays in the ordinance whether this text amendment is approved or not.
That's in the current conditional zoning ordinance.
Which is in the commercial district only.
Non-residential, so the industrial areas would be included too, but yes.
Very good. Anyone else that would like to speak? Okay, Madam Clerk, you have the letters.
This is from Ms. Genty Prunty. Dear Mayor Hayden, Board of Aldermen, and Southport City staff, once again, I thank you for the opportunity to comment on whether or not to adopt a conditional zoning amendment for residential for Southport. Despite months of repeated public opposition to CZ, I continue to be amazed that the Planning Committee, City staff, Board of Aldermen, or the Mayor don't seem to be curious about the lack of public advocacy for this amendment. Perhaps I have missed the multiple public comments, news article quotes by citizens, or letters to the editor in favor of CZ, but I don't think that is the case. We have heard over and over again citizens asking why now, why not fix potential problematic issues in the current zoning. Staff and elected officials could have started working on these fixes over the past 7 months rather than concentrating on pushing for CZ. Why even consider adopting CZ when our master land use plan needs to be updated? Why now when the city has not updated its zoning maps since 2019? Wouldn't have a handle on updated zoning maps be relevant in decision-making for CZ? Wouldn't addressing all these zoning-related issues first be the more prudent thing to do in order to avoid the same pattern of unintended consequences of the past? The only acknowledgement I have heard from staff and the board when pressed on the issue of possible unintended consequences with CZ has been there are no guarantees. That is not an acceptable answer for something so consequential for the future of Southport. I urge the Board of Aldermen to re-examine zoning protection, zoning project priorities, and vote no on the conditional zoning amendment for residential development.
Travis, do you have a comment on that at all? Okay, thank you.
This is from Ms. Shirley Sullivan. Dear Mayor Hayden and Aldermen, I have learned so much over the last couple of years while attending many of the City of Southport's various meetings. I continue to be amazed as I see what it takes to run a small city. I have never had such an interest in government before, but I wanted to take the time to learn about Southport more. There is so much good in Southport, and I appreciate all of our coastal city has to offer. I am, however, in conflict with the push for conditional rezoning in residential districts as it is being presented. At the end of the recent Board of Aldermen special meeting regarding CZ text amendment, I mentioned that I only heard the word control once. Controlled and orderly growth has been in our mission statement for a while and has been working well through our current UDOs that were updated in the last 3 years. I'm afraid the Board of Aldermen will be subject to further scrutiny if they pass this CZ text amendment and then at their discretion negotiate each application that is submitted before conditional rezoning. Purely custom zoning districts does sound like contract zoning. I really don't think we need another development tool. Nothing is broken. This will ultimately take the power away from the UDO. Does the alderman truly want all of this power? If some of the aldermen think the public don't trust them now, one can only imagine what this will do to the level of trust. The CZ text amendment is not better for the city of Southport in its current presentation. This text amendment says flexibility, purely custom, removes coupling requirement, negotiation, discretion, reduces standards, etc. No one is saying this text amendment will help the city limit or control developers. Better, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. The CAMA Core Land Use Plan and Comprehensive Plan should be reviewed deeply and updated for current statistics and demographics before adding such a flexible land development tool. The accelerated growth rate of Southport, Brunswick County, and New Hanover County, combined with economic issues facing all of these areas, need to be considered before making a hasty decision. Making such a major change that affects our land use maps, both current and future, deserves an in-depth review, not just 6 months of meeting and presentations pushing the supposed pros. The city of Southport hasn't identified what possible lots this could affect. One can only imagine how many different colors could be used for each purely custom conditional zoning district on the land use map. Seriously, I have too much to say about the cons of this text amendment. Many other citizens are aware of the cons. Why doesn't the Board of Aldermen acknowledge any cons? Shirley Sullivan. This is from Mr. Jim Lightbourne. He lives at 316 West Street. My comment focuses on the most contentious concern about the conditional zoning text, in particular, the flexibility to increase the number of residential dwellings on a property compared to what is currently allowed. The argument given for conditional zoning is the flexibility to arrive at a win-win compromise in developing property. So where do we want flexibility? The planning board has spoken. It does not want flexibility in maximum building height and minimum amount of open space. Those two are non-negotiable. In conditional zoning, do aldermen want flexibility to increase the number of residential dwellings on a property than currently allowed? A vote for conditional zoning as currently proposed is to vote yes. In conditional zoning, aldermen do not want the option to increase the number of possible dwellings in negotiations with a developer. And as aldermen, you know, this is the direct opposition to what your constituents are pleading with you not to do. Increase the permitted number of residential dwellings on a property. I suggest we hit pause and table conditional zoning. Developers appear eager for Southport to have conditional zoning, but why the rush for Southport? I agree with others that we first revise the comprehensive plan, the revision of which is already planned and budgeted. This may lead to updates in the UDO. In doing that, the city can identify a more comprehensive way areas in which flexibility is desired or not. Then we can revisit the option for a conditional zoning amendment.
Thank you. Very well done. Mr. Henley, any comments?
I really only have a couple comments. Certainly more than happy to answer any other questions, but in terms of the ability for the board to increase density, you have that power now. It can't happen through a conditional zoning process, but it could happen through the PUD process, or it could happen through the straight rezoning process. Any property owner anywhere in the city without any acreage thresholds can submit a rezoning application, and as staff, we have no discretion as whether or not to move it through the process and bring it to you for your consideration. So that includes rezoning all of the industrial area on the northeastern side of town from industrial to multifamily, or rezoning a single lot on Caswell Street to the business district. If somebody files the application, we have to process it. That is our moral, ethical, and quite frankly, it's in our job description. We have to do it. And so you have the power to increase density today, and whether or not this text amendment goes through or not doesn't change that. And that's statutorily required. We have to allow for property owners to propose changes to their zoning designation. The same is true for the UDO itself. Any interested party can file a text amendment proposal, and again, staff has to bring it forward. That text amendment could be changing the R10 district to R2. It could be changing the multifamily density from 11 to 111. It could be to throw the UDO in the trash. That is all possible. So in terms of conditional zoning, I mean, I've heard everything that has been said. There's a lot of valid points, but a lot of those criticisms about conditional zoning are also criticisms of zoning, period. And we as Southport are not going to be able to fix all of those concerns. My approach with conditional zoning is, in looking at how this community has been built over the years, and in looking at the care and attention that has been put onto, I mean, I remember when I first came to Southport, and, you know, the whole saying, all you have to do is drive down House Street one time and you fall in love with it. And it was shocking to me to learn that all of this that we hold dear in the downtown area it exists without any historic preservation protections at all. It's just here because people care about it. That says to me that conditional zoning is absolutely the appropriate tool because people care. But we also have to have a way to bring folks to the table to actually have these meaningful discussions. That's where the flexibility comes in. We could put you look at the PUD ordinance, we could put every floor that exists within the PUD ordinance on conditional zoning as well. We had this discussion multiple times at the planning board level too. But if we do that, it makes it less likely that it's used. So then all the benefits go away. Then folks are more likely to just pick the by right option. And then we have the unfortunate scenario, which I've already been in multiple times, where I'm presenting a project to a board that I know does not like the project, and yet I'm having to tell you that if you don't approve it, we're going to get sued and we're going to lose. This would be a way to try to avoid that. It's not going to work for every property. Not everybody's going to ask for it. And I can certainly tell you that the first thing, if this is approved, and the first person who comes to me and says, hey, Travis, I'm interested in pursuing a conditional rezoning, the first thing I'm going to tell them is to watch the however many meetings we end up having about this topic. If they want to know what the community wants, it's all right here. They're going to know that this is an uphill battle, and it's got to be something special that truly deserves its approval, because that's what we're all here to do, is to try to protect
Travis,
all the hard work that's done before us. Go ahead.
Under what circumstance could a third more houses be developed on the same property?
I'm sorry, what?
Well, it was said that a third more homes could be put on a property with conditional zoning. Under what circumstance?
If somebody requested a conditional rezoning in the low-density residential future land use category, that's the lowest density. We have a future land use map in the comprehensive plan. This is not our zoning map. That basically says these types of uses, these types of densities are allowed in this part of Southport. And if somebody proposed a conditional rezoning that was less than 3 units an acre, then in that aspect of the land use plan, it's consistent with what you've said. Because the board in 2014 and then again in 2020 adopted a plan that said residential development at a density of 2 to 3 units an acre is appropriate in this area. So that is one factor of many that goes into staff's recommendation from a comprehensive plan consistency standpoint that we present to the planning board and the Board of Aldermen. Does that pigeonhole you into having to approve the project? Absolutely not. But that would be...
So there's no guarantee on the conditional zoning that there could be a third more?
No. There's no guarantee at all.
No guarantee?
No.
Travis, I don't know if everyone heard you, but we talk about the UDO and the changes to the UDO, and right now in R20, if you move to PUD, you've got a requirement to have the 12,000 square foot lot. However, that developer who wanted smaller lots could make an application for text amendment, correct?
Yes, they could.
Okay. Any developer, any person, do they have to be a property owner?
They would have to have some level of relationship to the property owner.
Okay,
So-
I know the answer. I'm just asking so that everyone else comprehends and understands that that text amendment, talk about the process. What would that text amendment look like? If someone wanted to remove the requirement that it be 60% of the current underlying zoning, and they wanted it to be 10% or 20%, talk about that process of a text amendment. I know it. I've sat up
So,
here long enough to understand it, but
If somebody wanted to do that, they could file an application for a text amendment with staff. We have a text amendment running through the process right now that the board's going to set a public hearing on later on the agenda. And from there, staff reviews the text amendment proposal for its conformance to the land use plan. I can tell you that our recommendation would probably be to deny such a text amendment just because of how drastic it is. But in terms of the text change itself, all it would be is a strike through of the 60 and replacing it with 10. And it's
just
one word.
yeah, and just like conditional zoning, with or without your recommendation to this board being positive or negative, we can make the decision.
Absolutely. It's a policy level decision, and that authority is granted to this board and this board alone. The other, I meant to say this when I first came up here, the other thing that is possible under the ordinance today is somebody can ask for a rezoning from residential to commercial, and if the board approves it, then they can ask for a conditional rezoning. And that's the case whether the text amendment in front of you is approved or not.
Any further questions? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to go out of public hearing. Mayor Pro Tem, second by Alderman Allen. Any further discussion? Alderman Carroll, sorry. Yeah, y'all sound alike and look alike now. Y'all kind of morphed into each other. All in favor? All right, motion carried. We're out of public hearing. Item 2 on our agenda is another public hearing, which will go quickly. I'm pretty sure compared to the conditional zoning. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Annexation, public hearing and decision on the Lookout Point lots. I'll entertain a motion to go into public hearing. Okay, motion by Mayor Pro Tem and second by Alderman Carroll. Got it. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. We're now in public hearing. Mr. Henley.
So I explained a little bit about this at the last meeting. This is the required public hearing for the annexation process for what is now 2 properties at the end of Lookout Point, all the way at the water and the landing. That you just recently approved a final plat to split the 1 lot into 2 lots. And so they are now requesting annexation into the city for what I understand is for utility services.
Is there anyone like to speak in the public hearing? Anyone? Any citizens? Okay, great. I'll entertain a motion to go out of public hearing if there are no questions for Mr. Henley. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem and a second by Alderman Carroll. All in favor? Okay, we're out of the public hearing. Thank you, Alderman. So I'll entertain a motion for the voluntary annexation of these 2 lots.
I make a motion to approve the annexation request as presented.
A motion by Alderman Allen. Is there a second? Second by Mayor Pro Tem. Any further discussion? Okay.
I have a question for Travis. Is there any negative to granting this?
I personally don't see one, no. The only thing I would say is that this should have occurred years ago when the preliminary plat was approved, but we're better late than never.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Henley. Next item on our agenda is item 3, something dear to our heart, the Maritime Museum concession agreement. Mr. Berry, Mr. Wayne Berry, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the board, my name's Wayne Berry. I'm treasurer for Friends of the Maritime Museum. I have with me tonight Kathy Dudley, our administrative officer. Our purpose tonight is to bring to you a concession agreement which replaces the one presently in effect. Our concession agreement expires on May 31st, 2024. The last time we renewed this, it took us about 2 years to get it through the process. So the Friends of the Museum are trying to be proactive to bring the concession agreement to the board. The concession agreement is an agreement between the City of Southport, State of North Carolina, and the Friends of the Maritime Museum. The Friends is a nonprofit organization, and their mission is to support the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport. The basis of the concession agreement is the barracks at Fort Johnson, which comprise about 5,900 square feet, plus another 3,000 square feet that we added to that. The back in 2010, the Maritime Museum was looking for a new place to locate. The City of Southport had recently obtained ownership of Fort Johnson, and they agreed to allow the barracks portion of that to be occupied by the Maritime Museum. The conditions of that concession agreement was that the Friends of the Museum would upgrade the barracks for suitable space for the museum and to maintain those buildings' repairs and maintenance. Thereby, the City of Southport had no responsibility. All the air conditioning units, electricity was accepted as it was, and the same thing is stated in the current concession agreement. During the past 10 years, the Friends have done all the maintenance, paid the utilities, and basically took care of all the expenses that were not paid by the state. And we're trying at this time to transfer as many of those expenses as we can to the state of North Carolina. But if they do not accept it, then the Friends accept that responsibility. And that's why we are a part of the concession agreement. And we present that to you tonight to consider that. The Friends of the Museum started on this probably about 6 months ago, and we eliminated a lot of the language that was in the concession agreement that we felt like was not necessary. Back when the original one was done, we were in the process of rehabilitating the building, and there was a lot of language that we felt like was no longer necessary. I'm open to any questions that the board members may have.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Berry?
I just have one. Has our city attorney reviewed this document? And you don't see anything that's troublesome? Thank you.
Ms. Hemphill, would you like to add anything to this, please? As head of Parks and Rec.
No, it's just, standard agreement. The last 10 years have worked well, and, they've done what they said they were going to do. So I don't see anything wrong with it. And if you guys approve it, we send it back. We send it to the state, and not his state, but the SHPO. And you know, if they don't like something, they will let us know. So, but yeah, I don't have any problems with it.
The museum is a great asset to our community, and we're so grateful that you're located where you are, Mr. Berry, and grateful for the service that all of y'all do. Thank you so much. Any further questions?
No, I'd like to make a motion to have Mayor Hayden sign the concession agreement that starts June 1, 2024 until May 31st, 2034.
Excellent. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I have one quick comment if I can.
Absolutely.
I do hope the state will step up and relieve the Friends of some of the financial burden that they've been carrying for the last 10 years or more. I don't know if there's anything we can do to try to impact their generosity, but I hope staff and the mayor and Dory and Bonnie can, you know, be alert for anything that we can do to try to help that.
Yeah, I had talked to Representative Miller about this in March when I went up to see him, because the Friends had asked me about specifically like money for a new roof and that type thing. So they are looking into that. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, questions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Berry. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so you'd like a break? Are y'all, you need a break? Okay, all right. We'll take a 10-minute break. All right, thank you. right, thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, those that are still here, thank you. Board, thank you for your good discussion. Staff, thank you for the conditional zoning marathon. We will, the next time we need that, we'll just have a separate meeting on it. So if we need more discussion, Mr. Henley, we'll just do a separate special call meeting. The next item on our agenda, W.K. Dixon contract amendment. This shows how this board is embracing the importance of our infrastructure, and this has to do with our sewer and lift station. So I'll call on our city engineer, Tom Zilnick.
And I'll try to be quicker than Travis was earlier.
It's hard not to be. That'll be easy.
Here tonight to get authorization for the next phase of the W.K. Dixon sewer project. This is one where they did a survey and an analysis of 6 lift stations. They've completed that. They've made recommendations that 3 of them need to be improved. And this is for the design contract on those 3 approvals. And this is all being funded with a DEQ grant. So at that point, I will
Can you tell us which ones, the 3 that need to, it's probably in here and I apologize, but if you can just tell us what the 3 are.
The 3 are Park Ave, 9th Street, and Moore Street.
Okay, any further questions?
Tom?
Engineer?
I have some questions for you. Part of that is just for citizens' awareness. So, if I can find my glasses here. I have spoken to Tom before this, and I wanted to make sure that we were crosswalking the lift station refurbishment, the sewer pipe I&I study, the public health dilemma of the polluted creeks, the mandated federal lead water pipe issue, and the repaving of our crumbling streets. So we have a lot of these issues that are all out there, and they're here, and they're here, and they're here. And I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that the city is actually linking those together now. Is that a fair statement, Tom?
Correct.
Okay. So the next part of it was I looked at the study that was started in December 7th of 2022 and has been released to us, and it's public record. So it has a timeline on it. And so we've used 7 months up already. And it goes on through construction services, goes on to January of 2026 for 3 lift stations. So altogether, that would be almost 3 years. They built the Hoover Dam in 3 years. They built the Pentagon in 16 months. And Bowling Springs plans to build 4 dams in 3 years. So I went to Tom to try to figure out why is this going to take 3 years to do. And he had a response to me that I think everybody should hear, because this is already out in public record.
Right. First off, the timeline that was put in was to meet the requirements of the grant, and the grant expires in June of 2026. We have to have it complete by then. So that's why the 2026 date was chosen. It's probably going to be completed much sooner than that. The problem is that there's generators and pumps that are going in these lift stations that at the current time have about a 1-year lead time, and they can't be ordered until we award the contract to a contractor. So once we get this designed and the consultant could check with the company of the pump and generator manufacturer, we can get a better idea and we could scale this down. But we felt, the consultant and myself, that it was better to extend this out as opposed to saying it's going to be done in 2025, and then everybody saying, well, why isn't it done? Well, we had long lead times on equipment. So that's the reason for it. Once it's designed, we'll have a much better feel on what the actual timeline will be.
And the I&I study, I think, has a 2026 date on it as well. Are some of the issues that you just discussed for the study of the I&I?
No, the I&I study is a totally separate thing. It has a 2026 end date just because that's when the grant has to be spent by. Right now, we're waiting for confirmation from the state. We only have a letter of intent to fund. We don't have an actual letter to fund. We've supplied them with all their paperwork, and we're waiting to hear back from them. Once we hear back from them, the I&I study will start, and it has about an 8-month completion. The first 3 months will be the actual field work. Then there'll be about 2 months of analysis and data collecting, and then about a month to prepare the report and come to the board with a presentation.
So once again, I wanted to make sure that everybody understood, and for the record, that while these documents are out, this keeps saying 2026, 2026, there's some reason for it being elongated, but it probably should not be as elongated as these documents indicate.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion, questions?
I make a motion to approve the contract amendment to W.K. Dixon for sewer line and lift station replacement.
Okay, we have a motion and a second from Alderman Allen and Alderman Carroll. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Excellent, motion carried. Thank you. Very good project. Item 5 is a financial policies that you heard about at the workshop board. This is a policy for taxes on split jurisdiction properties and also POW bill policy, POW bill being money for our roads. Mr. Gross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Board. The City of Southport doesn't have a policy currently that sets the standard for billing water and sewer services when the parcel of land is split between the city limits and the ETJ. Nor is there a policy on split parcels regarding eligibility for recycling and yard debris services. The current list of split parcels is provided by Brunswick County Tax Office and shows Southport is somewhat inconsistent in its billing practice and needs to establish a standard. This policy has been reviewed with our city attorney, and our recommendation is included in the draft policy that if your split parcel has 25% or more within the Southport city limits, you are eligible for water and sewer rates at the city limit rate. If your parcel of land is less than 25% in the city limits, you will be charged the higher ETJ rates. Just for your information, anyone who has less than 25% of land in the city limits can request voluntary annexation. And I crunched the numbers because I knew one of you smart board would ask me this question. They're going to save $93 a month on their water and sewer rates by going with the inside city limit rates if their voluntary annexation is approved. So that is the policy on water and sewer rates dealing with split parcels. There's approximately 16 properties that fall under that category that currently have residences on them.
Any questions on that? Okay. I'll entertain a motion that we adopt this policy for taxes on the split jurisdiction with the 25% or more. You can pay city rate, and if you're less than that, you can certainly annex into the city.
Motion to approve the billing policy for split parcels.
Thank you, Alderman Carroll. Second by Mr. Lombardi. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. All right, policy, POW bill policy.
The next policy deals with the POW bill. The City of Southport does not currently have a policy which addresses POW bill funding eligibility, reporting requirements, deadlines, and how the funds may be used or even not used. Our proposed policy draws language directly from the North Carolina Department of Transportation POW bill unit website and clarifies our responsibilities as a recipient of those funds. Just for your information, once again, we expect to get approximately $145,000 this fiscal year from the state through the POW bill. Current balance is approximately $217,000, which means that Tom Stanley and his team will have about $362,041 for FY24 from the POW bill fund to maintain our streets, bike paths, sidewalks, etc. So this is a very important pot of money that hopefully Southport will benefit from again this fiscal year.
Yes, absolutely. And this is an excellent fund of money for our city. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the POW bill policy.
Okay, Alderman Carroll, is there a second? Mayor Pro Tem, any further discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carried on the POW bill policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Board.
Thank you. Item 6, the Wilmington Metro Planning versus Cape Fear versus Grand Strand. This is something, what is the best group for Southport to be a part of, and something that our board needs to have more information on. And I call on Mr. Henley for further discussion and presentation.
Yeah, I'm sure to the terror of everyone, I'm back.
Motion to approve.
We're really playing all the development services greatest hits tonight. Just a little bit of background here. So transportation planning in North Carolina is done on a regional scale as opposed to each individual municipality doing its own. You can imagine in just Brunswick County with our 19 municipalities, if we all did our own, this would be more of a mess than it already is. All municipalities and counties are located either within a metropolitan planning organization or a rural planning organization, an MPO, and I have an acronym slide here in a second. When a regional area population exceeds 50,000, and by that I mean their urban population exceeds 50,000, they're federally required to have establish an MPO. And then MPO boundaries are to reflect the central urbanized area of a region. It's a little easier to think about it if you think about Wilmington as a central urban area. And then also areas where this central urbanized area is anticipated to expand, back up a little bit, over the next 10 to 20 years. Acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms in transportation planning. An RPO, when I say RPO, I'm referring to the Cape Fear Rural Transportation Planning Organization. And I've got slides about each of these. The WMPO is the Wilmington Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. GSATS is the Grand Strand Area Transportation Study Metropolitan Planning Organization. And the STIP is the State Transportation Improvement Program. I could have put way more acronyms, but I chose not to. So we are in a relatively unique situation where we are currently in the Cape Fear RPO. It's housed through the Council of Governments. Essentially functions as a department of the Council of Governments. Current director is named Sam Boswell. It encompasses all of Columbus County, most of Pender County, the northern part of Pender County, and then the middle portion of Brunswick County, including Southport, Oak Island, St. James, BSL, Bolivia, Sandy Creek. I forgot Northwest, don't tell them. But, and all the unincorporated area that surrounds that. We, as Southport, have had quite a bit of success with the RPO over the years. It is through the RPO that the 211 project, the 211 widening project was funded. Collaborated with the RPO on the Southport pedestrian plan. There's been a lot more projects that have been, excuse me, that we've collaborated with them with, and we're collaborating with them again right now through our the prioritization process through the STIP. There's a number of projects identified across Brunswick County that are going to be considered holdover projects, and we'll get to compete again in the next round of the STIP without the Cape Fear RPO having to include them in our submittals, which means we can submit more projects. And then there's a bunch of projects that are identified already, not just projects that were previously submitted in older rounds that didn't score very well, or projects that are identified in the Comprehensive Transportation Plan or in our Southport Pedestrian Plan. This is one of the reasons why you do those plans, is that when you're in a plan and you can show that it's adopted, it helps these projects score quite a bit better. It also helps them compete for grants too. I mentioned that these MPOs are supposed to be looking not just at their core urbanized area, but at areas where their core urbanized area may expand into in the next 10 or 20 years. And so we are in a unique situation in which two MPOs are looking at us to see where their urban areas are going to expand. So the first is the Wilmington MPO. It's housed within the City of Wilmington's municipal government structure. If you email one of the MPO staff, that's at Wilmington email address. They have 12 current staff members, including a director and a deputy director. Currently, it includes all of New Hanover County, Eastern Brunswick County, that's Leland, Navasso, Belleville, and Southern Pender County. They have two separate divisions. One is a transportation planning division. They do transportation planning. And one is a transportation technical division. So this is, and I have direct experience with this in previous roles, this is essentially staff at the MPO that are dedicated to coordinating the review and approval of traffic impact analyses by themselves and NCDOT related to development projects. They, as opposed to what I'm about to talk about, have not officially voted to pursue expansion. They are asking us if we are interested in potentially joining, and then they will vote at some point later about whether they officially want to expand. As opposed to GSATs, they are housed within the Waccamaw Regional Council of Governments based in Georgetown, South Carolina. They currently have 3 staff, and if they do end up choosing to expand, they would be looking to establish an office in North Carolina as well. It covers all of Horry County and Georgetown County, South Carolina, and the southern portion of Brunswick County. The eastern portion is near Supply. They have voted to pursue expansion, and voted to pursue expansion including us, Oak Island, St. James, Boylan Spring Lakes, and the unincorporated county that surrounds them. So some things to consider. The status of Southport within the organization that we belong to. Within both GSATs and the Wilmington MPO, if we choose to join either one, we would certainly not be the biggest municipality that is within it. Within the RPO today, we are among the biggest fish, maybe the biggest fish in that pond. Our ability to have projects funded through the STIP and the capacity of the organization to help fund or participate in other transportation projects outside of the STIP. You know, Bonnie and Dory and I have heard a lot from folks with experience working with GSATs, because we don't have as much experience collectively working with them. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about special projects, things of that nature. I can speak from direct experience working with Wilmington MPO that I've had a lot of success getting special planning projects approved through their budget process and getting adopted at no cost to the local government completely. They cover the cost of it. It's just part of our dues. But Southport has a tradition of being very successful working with the RPO. And again, being one of the big players in the RPO has certainly helped us in that regard as well. And then finally, our connection or affiliation to the two MPOs from a transportation perspective and from just a pure societal perspective. When you think about Southport, who are we more closely connected to? Who are we more likely to share transportation priorities with? A project we're talking to the WMPO and submitting projects for consideration through the STIP. A project up in Pender County is probably not going to do much for us. Same thing if we're in GSATs. The Carolina Bays Parkway extension is a big priority for Calabash, Sunset Beach, Southern Brunswick County. Is that a priority for us? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Those are the things we have to think about. So what we're in front of you tonight to ask for is, are you interested in just pursuing one or both of the MPO, or are you comfortable staying with the RPO? You could come to a conclusion that the answer to that question is yes to all three for now, and however the board would like to direct us. If you'd like to hear from these organizations directly, we certainly can do that. We are also not under any obligation to join either Wilmington or GSATs. If we choose that we want to stay in the RPO, that's our decision, and there's nothing anybody can say about it. What I will tell you, though, is particularly for GSATs, if Oak Island and St. James do not join, we will not be joining GSATs because they're not going to jump geographic areas. It just isn't efficient. That would not do us any favors at all if Oak Island and St. James were not part of it as well. We have heard that St. James is interested in joining, but we have not heard yet where Oak Island is coming down on that topic. So Dory and I are more than able to answer any questions you may have on this one.
Was, wait a minute, never mind.
What is Travis, what's the connection or relationship between these planning organizations and NCDOT?
They work hand in hand together. They're not the same organization, but they are effectively attached at the hip.
But the organizations are all funded by the members?
Yes.
Not by DOT, correct?
I believe there is some element of DOT funding, and the MPOs receive quite a bit of federal funding as well. I don't believe that's the case for the RPOs. But I would also, in terms of, that's definitely, the capacity of the organizations, in terms of how much money they're bringing in, that's certainly a question to ask of each organization.
So Travis, I don't know where I was, sleeping on the wheel or something. I learned about all of these about a month and a half ago. And then I learned that all of these organizations have elected officials that go to these things, except us. We don't attend the RPO one. We haven't attended for 4 years at least. So I think we have a lot of learning before we make any decision on anything. So I'd be moving towards having them all come to us in a workshop. However, the best way to do that is, I'm not going to tell you how to do that, so that we have some education. I did attend the Wilmington one. I did attend the GSATs one, and I just spent 2 hours, and I missed the one that you were at for the RPO because I was looking at the school traffic impact study. But I did spend 2 hours with in Wilmington the other day, going over the notes of the RPO one. And I was not overwhelmed yet. I asked some real questions about, I went to the MPO, the Wilmington one. I didn't ask any questions because it was all brand new to me and I was trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. So when I went to the GSAT ones, I sat there and one of the members asked this question: if we actually incorporate these other jurisdictions in, are we taking the same amount of money and splitting the pie in more little slices? There was no answer. There was a lot of words, but he never got an answer. I asked is, if we all join you, and I picked a number. I said, let's assume it's 30,000 people. I don't know if it is, but let's assume it's 30,000 people. What's the threshold for the next group where you get more money? How does that work? Well, I got no answer. The answer is it's 50,000 and 250,000. They already have 250,000, so our 30,000 doesn't seem to be able to move that needle anywhere. And the needle, as I understand it, and you may know better than I, moves at the census. So we're like 7 or 8 years away from, if we join one of these other ones, from having any potential additional funds of money going to the other two, the two big ones. And we might be better off staying with the RPO one that we're in. But once again, I couldn't answer, I knew 211 was done. I don't know what other things they did. I was told Southport had 2 weeks to get their wish list in for the current year's stuff. And I was shocked that, like, we don't know that? I think you're familiar with that, but I'm not sure.
I am, and I was told we had longer than 2 weeks, but.
That's what I was told yesterday, and I spent 2 hours up there.
Yeah, this round of prioritization through the STIP has been there's been a lot of waiting because the previous round of the STIP ended up not ever happening because that's when DOT had all those funding issues. And so it's been years since we've gone through a prioritization process just to begin with. And so, now we're at the point of trying to piece together project submittals, but so is every other municipality in the RPO, and the same exact process is happening in both of the MPOs. And we only have a certain number of projects that we're allowed to submit every year across the entire organization. So, and to your point about, Southport had a seat on the RPO's TAC. It was held by Mayor Dove.
Right.
And then when, essentially what happened is when there was turnover in the mayor position, and this was explained to me by the former director of the COG, of the RPO, who's now the director of the COG, Alan Serkin, is the mayors of Brunswick County caucused and nominated the alternate, the alternate at that time, to take the permanent seat.
So there's 2 cities or jurisdictions that are the things. Neither one of them owns a state road in them. And that's who's running the show here right now, because we didn't have any participation in this. And I'm not sure how the whole thing fell apart, but that's what's happening right now. I don't begrudge those 2 people for those 2 jurisdictions for jumping on the bandwagon and seizing the day, but the day passed and we didn't know anything about it. And so there's a lot of education for all of us, for the public, for everybody to understand what these things do, get a list of what the RPO has done for us other than 211. I've been told lots of things. I don't know what those lots of things are. I know that there's a sidewalk thing that went in for Southport to go from the ABC store to Dozier Hospital on House Street. I don't know who picked that, why that one piece was there, but the RPO has that in the Southport wish list. I don't know how it got there, don't know how long it's been there, but that's the only thing that I know that's for sure.
At one point, it was a funded project. It may still be a funded project. I'll find out and let you know, but since you brought it up, that the humor in the endpoints of that project is not lost on anyone in the region, just to make it light.
I don't even know how, if we were going to do something, I would assume we would go all the way up to like Robert Rourke or someplace, something.
Well, and this is learned on bike ped projects. It's also learned on roadway projects. Is doing shorter segments helps projects score a lot better under DOT's methodology.
Well, then there might be some logic to their madness. Another part of what you get at of going to these meetings is you figure out what the long-range plans for some of the bigger projects are. I mean, I've heard about maybe rail service out of Wilmington well, they've got that. They've got a whole program they're trying to fund. They have the land where they're going to run it. There's 2 options to do that. There's all kinds of great information, but when we don't know what's going on at Robert Rourke in 211 4 years ago when that was being talked about with a major developer, and he stood there and told us that he had great conversations with DOT about that intersection, and technically, I don't think that intersection is in Southport, but it's like our piece here and our piece there and our piece there. We should know about those things, but you have to attend these meetings to understand that.
Yes, you did.
Travis, it seems to me you're kind of leaning toward not going with these, at least at this point. Am I correct in vibing that?
I think there's pros and cons to each, really. I don't have as much experience working directly with GSATs, so my personal experience is colored in that regard, but I've had a lot of success in the past working with both the RPO and the MPO. Pender County, in my last role, we had both, and certainly different challenges in each one, but you know what's helpful for us in staying with the RPO, for example, is that there's really not a lot of other municipalities that have the urban feel of their town like we do. It's really us, Whiteville, and Burgaw, and that's pretty much it. The rest are beach towns. You said Whiteville correctly. Yeah. Pronunciation is important, and especially in Whiteville. That's right. I was corrected very quickly on that, and very quickly on when I said topsail for the first time. It's topsail. But the rest are beach towns. Their needs and wants are going to be very different than, you know, your kind of more classic traditional street grid style of town. And so, because of that, we're in a better position to play for some of those projects that, you know, otherwise you're not going to put a sidewalk down the middle of, or down the side of 211 through the Green Swamp, probably.
Would it be fair to say that we should not make a decision, or that what we need is for you to come back to us with pros and cons of joining each and your recommendations?
Well,
is there an urgency to this in any
there
way?
sort of is, yes. Wilmington they told us they wanted to know by the end of July if we were interested. Now, can we say we're interested and then back out later? Absolutely. And to me, while I think staff is certainly able to provide a more detailed pros and cons of each, I think hearing from these organizations themselves is really, because ultimately this is the board's decision.
Do we have time to do that before the end of July?
We can try, but I can't.
Well, we can tell
It's
them.
only an indication of interest.
We can tell them we're interested, and,
Yeah, I think
and
we
then we
should.
can
It's not a
schedule
commitment.
workshops with them coming down. I think that would be the best approach, and hear from them directly. But yeah, tell them we're interested. We're already a member of the RPO, so yeah, tell them we're interested, and they're willing to come down, and let's set a time. We'll set a workshop, and we have workshops already set up, you know, the Fridays before the meeting, so we can go ahead and get that rotated in.
And to Alderman Alt's point too, the voting structure of the RPO's apparatus is, according to Alan Serkin, on the next agenda. So the first agenda it will be on is the staff. Each of these organizations has essentially two levels of boards. The first board is a staff level board made up of planners and other folks from across the region, and then they collectively vote on providing recommendations to for the RPO. It's called the RTAC, or the Rural Transportation Advisory Committee, but they actually have decision-making authority, so maybe advisory is not the best word, but so yes, that whole voting scheme is something that they're discussing.
So one of the other topics that was brought up, and so we think of these things as, I need some infrastructure built. But if I understood the words correctly, you can also ask for studies to be done, and they'll pay for the whole thing. Sometimes there is a matching fund, but because Columbus County is some kind of unique entity, the part that's in the RPO, we only pay like 5% of the matching fund where everybody else has to pay 10. Those are all the kind of little things that we probably have to figure out what all the pluses are. I have to admit, I wasn't taking copious notes because I was like overwhelmed like what was going on. But there's more to it than just waiting 5 years or 6 years to get your favorite project. Not only, you can get it funded and still never get it done. Because at the end, better projects come in by their assessment, and your project that's been funded is tossed to the side, and a new project is funded. So there's all this dance that goes on that everybody should understand, that just because you get funded doesn't mean that's the end all and be all.
Calling it a dance is maybe the best way I've ever heard it described. So yeah, that's what it is. And I wish I could say that all of this transportation stuff was them reopening 95 in 2 weeks like they did in Philly, but that is the exception, not the rule.
Right.
All right, any further questions or discussion? Good discussion there, and I think, Travis, if you'll get it set up for our workshops, for them to come and give a presentation, that would be great. All right, thank you.
Do we need a official motion to
I think that
express our interest to them? You got enough?
I think a motion would be helpful.
Okay, I entertain a motion. Absolutely.
I make a motion to inform all three transportation planning organizations that we've been discussing that we have potential interest in joining them.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. All right, item 7, how appropriate, the noise ordinance.
Like I said, greatest hits from Development Services tonight. So the noise ordinance is here in front of you for your review. As I mentioned in the workshop, this does incorporate the discussion we had at the last Alderman meeting regarding refuse pickup. And so that would be, refuse pickup would be exempt from the ordinance after 6 a.m. each day. However, you also reserve the caveat under community events. In the case of July 4th Festival, if you have to go out there earlier, you have the ability to do that without breaking the ordinance as well.
So this gives them flexibility to get in and out. The trucks aren't running into each other and that type thing. So I think that'll work out well, and I think the citizens will be pleased that unless under these certain circumstances, it won't start before 6 a.m. And the music is important, just like the man with the trombone said, it's, we want to hear the music down in the yacht basin. If it's too loud, someone will call and complain, and our police will go down there and check on it. And if it's still too loud, they'll, cut them off. So I'll entertain a motion, unless they have further questions for Mr. Hanlon.
I want to make a motion to adopt.
I do have a question before we do that. This is a new ordinance, is this correct, or change to the amendment?
This is an amendment to the existing ordinance,
Okay, don't we need a public hearing?
not for a code of ordinances.
This
we
is
do
Code
not.
of Ordinances. I make a motion to approve the noise ordinance amendment as presented.
Motion by Mayor Pro Tem and a second by Mr. Lombardi and Alderman Carroll. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Next up, again, the greatest hits are coming. The right-of-ways, we've had good discussion on that, and I know there are varied comments on it, and we just need to discuss a little bit further. But my impression is that people that have their yards manicured in the right-of-way and have things in the right-of-way, as long as it's not a hazard, or I think we're going to have to grandfather these in. There are situations on Bay Street, on East Bay Street, where the rocks and the fence and that type thing, near Kingsley Park, is going to have to, needs to be removed and fixed and that type thing. So, Mr. Henley, interested in your thoughts and the board's discussion.
All right. Rights of way. So staff is not requesting the adoption of any language tonight, but what we are requesting is that the board identify its preferred direction before beginning the public input process. And Really, all that is ensuring that instead of, as we're doing our PR efforts and doing, open houses and workshops and that sorts of thing, we're able to say, not just, what do you think about the rights of way? It's, this is what we've identified as a potential solution. What do you think about this? What are ways it could be improved? It's a way to ensure that as we're going through this effort and we're bringing public input back to the board, it's a way to make that input. We're going to get to a solution a lot faster if we do it that way. So allowable encroachment, so based on board feedback, you've got some options in front of you. I will say that there was supposed to be a commentary in there. The options for essentially the grandfathering section under draft section 1610, option 1 and option 2, the red sections are new, but they're identical between each other. The purple is new, but that's where the differences are. I hope that was clear as you were reading it. I'm sorry that there wasn't that denotion. But based on board feedback, as we've heard, as we've discussed this, permissible within the rights of way would be driveways and parking spaces held to the existing surfacing and dimensional standards that are in place within the UDO today. Vegetation that does not extend within the horizontal, not extend above the horizontal plane of the ground, grass, and irrigation systems for that grass. And then the city would reserve the right to remove encroachments in the conduct of city work, will not be held liable for their removal, and will not replace them.
Travis, on the parking spaces, we had originally identified a maximum width.
The UDO,
Or just-
we
okay.
follow the UDO. There is, I believe,
Because, okay.
the review and approval of those parking spaces would have to occur through development services, public services, and the fire marshal. And so there may be circumstances where where those parking spaces would not be allowed for various reasons, public safety being primary among them.
Vegetation, right now, horizontal plane, which would mean bushes, anything like that, anything above basically grass level almost, would not be allowed. Is that correct?
It would not be allowed to be installed
Okay.
going forward.
So grandfathered in would be existing bushes and
Yes.
so forth.
Trees they're gonna remain and essentially be treated separately. The whole city tree process and everything with that. Other vegetation, bushes and shrubs, flowers, et cetera, would be permitted to remain until removed by the city or some other action. That could be the person who installed them taking them up. Once removed, they shall not be replaced except in conformance to the applicable ordinances. So if they wanted to do the parking space or plant grass or stuff like that, they would be allowed to do that. But planting bushes, planting those sorts of things, that would not be permitted going forward. Hardened structures, and this is essentially going back to the way this read when we originally brought this to you. Upon adoption of the ordinance, city begins the 6-month grace period in which these hardened structures are to be removed by the property owners. Once that 6 months has run, the city will begin an effort to remove those hardened structures themselves in accordance with the applicable ordinance for removing them, which is already in the code today. We talked some about specific hardened structures that were put in place for protecting stormwater, protecting from drainage issues, that sort of thing. So I think it would be prudent for the city to reserve the right to allow hardened structures to remain on a case-by-case basis when a matter of public safety. And I would say that the determining factors on that would certainly not be me. That would be the police chief, fire chief, and our city engineers. And so that would be, some of this is not yet incorporated into what you have in front of you because we talked about it at the workshop, but this would be essentially the scope that we would take to the public and solicit feedback on and then we would bring that back to you, hopefully for ordinance adoption.
Looks great.
I would like to thank staff for continuing to bring this conversation forward. I'm grateful for our planning staff and for their depth of expertise and professionalism and their commitment to our community. And we all take the right-of-way conversation very seriously. In part, the decisions we make regarding our rights-of-way will determine how Southport will remain going forward. The homepage on our city website says, "Welcome to Southport, home of the salubrious breezes." In 1792, Joshua Potts platted our city with these 99-foot road rights-of-way. And what we know for sure is Mr. Potts laid the roads out perpendicular to the river. It's evident when you look at a map. Our roads follow the curve of the river. That's why Atlantic Avenue and House Street are not parallel. From this, it seems plausible that since Mr. Potts believed the salubrious breezes restored his failing health and saved his life, he may have platted our 99-foot rights-of-way to maximize the salubrious breezes for everyone. The openness created by these original 99-foot rights-of-way is unique and very much a part of the design of our city's Old Town area. These wide rights-of-way were purposely platted and are an important historical reference. As a community, we have taken steps to protect our historic character. The recent creation of the Historic Preservation Commission is tangible evidence of our community's commitment to our past and our future. I, for one, believe it's important to take action that is consistent with our values and goals, and these rights-of-way belong to all the citizens of Southport and must be maintained, because drip by drip, the stone is washed away. Loss of these rights-of-ways would fundamentally change what we look like, and over time, part of our historic character will be lost. Based on staff's request for direction regarding clarification of the right-of-way ordinance, I make a motion to consider the following ordinance updates: 16-A Option 1 and 16-10 Option 1, and the accompanying Appendix A, right-of-way encroachment permit process for managing and mitigating existing right-of-way encroachments, and direct staff to begin the public input process to help establish final ordinance recommendations. Additionally, I would like to ask staff to continue the strict, proactive enforcement of our existing ordinance that prohibits anything to be placed within the right-of-way beyond the horizontal plane.
For clarity for the public, who may not have these options and so on, the ordinance in front of them, what exactly are you calling for?
Because we're not voting on this statute tonight,
No.
right? That's not what you're asking for.
We're saying that that's what
Our
we
goal
are.
is?
We're saying, we're not making ordinance tonight, we're choosing a direction for staff, so that gives them a jumping off point. They have to have, it's as, well,
No,
I'll let you speak.
Well, we have not agreed in our previous discussions at workshop. There's been different opinions about what that direction should be. So what direction are you calling for?
I'm calling for the direction that's in our packet. Option 1, it's all in the packet. That's what I'm calling for.
What is option 1?
Hang on.
It would essentially allow for the installation of up to 2 parking spaces within the right-of-way in front of a property owner's property in accordance with the dimensional standards and surfacing found within the UDO today. It would also allow for vegetation or other protective measures permitted to be placed within 10 feet of the base of a city tree either by the neighboring property owner or by the city for the express purpose of limiting damage to the tree by nearby parked vehicles. Both of those processes require or would require review and approval by development services, by public services, and by the fire marshal prior to installation. And then under existing encroachments, section 16-10, option 1 is the current process that's already in the ordinance today with regard to how things are removed, and then essentially a grandfathering section that says right-of-way encroachments existing prior to the adoption date of this ordinance in accordance with what I've proposed here, which is limited to vegetation, shall be permitted to remain, and I'm quoting, so long as the encroachments do not interfere with the free passage of persons or vehicles or otherwise creates a hazard to the public until such time as the city desires to remove them. Such encroachments shall not be permitted to be expanded in any dimension, and then the city would reserve the right to remove a right-of-way encroachment for any public purpose, shall not be liable for the removal, and shall levy the cost of removal in accordance with the already existing section of the ordinance.
So Travis, if I had a right-of-way space in front of my house and I put 2 parking spaces in there, is there wording in there that clearly tells the landowner, you can do that, but they ain't your parking spaces? Do we have wording in there that says that? Okay.
I think yes, we do, but when I can certainly make that even stronger.
I just want to make sure, because in the past, they did it because they wanted to do it, and we didn't do anything about it, and they thought that was their own already. Now, if we're saying you can do it, I just want to make sure they understand that on the 4th of July, somebody might actually park there because that's where they found the park.
Actually, it says, Alderman Alt, it says parking spaces constructed by a property owner within the right-of-way shall remain open for public parking and shall not be reserved for the property whose owner constructed the spaces. That's actually in the language.
And I thank you for that.
And what does it say about, what does this option say about fences? Existing fences, walls, and, you know, we call it hardscape.
They would be
catch-all. Would
so
people have to remove those?
The way the ordinance that's in your packet does not reflect that, but the direction based on the motion from Alderman Mosteller would be that hardened structures, that we would grant a 6-month grace period to folks to remove their hardened structures, and you know, potentially that gives them a chance to relocate them onto their property, as opposed to the city removing them itself once the grace period is over. And I would anticipate that effort would take some time. It would not certainly happen overnight, but it would happen.
So tonight, you're asking us to vote to give you direction on whether this is how we want to, what we want to present to the public, excuse me, for public hearing, to begin the process of adopting this ordinance.
Yeah, we would do a lot more than just a public hearing, but certainly the board, you know, as we get through the, you know, closer to adoption, if the board so chose to call a public hearing, then certainly we could do that. So.
We had a motion and a second, and we certainly will have a public hearing on this as we move forward. You know, that's further down the road, but yeah. This is basically to give them staff direction and to also begin the education process with our public. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried unanimously. Thank you. All right. The next, Mr. Henley, is the request for a public hearing, zoning text amendment on sign illumination.
All right, so if it will please the board, I'm going to try to tackle the next two together. The next two items, one of them is a zoning text amendment to section 319H of the Unified Development Ordinance related to the illumination of signs. There's also a zoning map amendment at 605 West Brown Street, rezoning that property from multifamily to R10. Both zoning text amendment and a zoning map amendment require a public hearing held by this board prior to taking any decision on the matter. And so all staff is asking from you tonight is to set public hearings for both items at your August meeting.
That would be the August 10th meeting.
Yes.
Board.
And staff will incorporate more detailed presentations about each item in August, so the public hearing can run off of those.
Okay, we entertain a motion for both of those public hearings on August 10th. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem and Alderman Carroll, any further discussion? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Motion's carried. Thank you. Item 11, and Alderman Lombardi, this should be straightforward. Recommendation and appointment of Board of Adjustment members.
Yes, there was actually 5 positions open, 3 city, 1 city alternate, and 1 ETJ alternate. We had 3 applicants, all present members. Josh McGee, who's an architect, Pete Haslip, who's a park and recreation specialist, and Tuck Masker, who's a civil engineer. They were interviewed and accepted, and I'd like to make the motion to accept them to continue their service with the Board of Adjustment.
We have a motion and a second by Alderman Carroll. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed to these appointments? Okay, motion carried. Congratulations. Thank you. Item I, committee reports. We'll start with Alderman Allen.
None, thank you.
Alderman Carroll? Alderman Alt?
None.
Alderman Lowe Davis?
Forestry is going to have a very pleasant surprise at the next meeting. A tree champion certificate will be awarded to a citizen who is, in fact, a champion for Southport trees. And you'll find out more next month about what was done and what qualifies somebody to be a tree champion. This is something that the board used to do years ago, I've heard, and it kind of fell to the wayside, and Forestry Committee is hoping to make this something like an almost monthly event.
Thank you. Alderman Lombardi? No, I'm good. Okay. Alderman Mosteller?
Just a reminder that the regular planning board meeting will be next Thursday at 6 p.m. here in the community building.
Okay. ABC board met yesterday. Their store did more than any other store in the month of June in terms of gross revenue. So we really are going to need that sidewalk from Dozier Hospital to the ABC board. So if we could, Travis, and we get to work on that immediately. And, and they're doing some, they're planting some trees and that type thing. So I'm looking forward to that. So it was an excellent meeting. So thank you. Manager's report.
Thank you. I haven't had to say a whole lot tonight, but I just wanted to let everyone know that there are several projects out for bid right now. Cemetery maintenance, IT assessment, shoreline stabilization, the comprehensive plan, and the parking study will be going out soon. The finance staff has been working hard to provide information to the auditor so we can stay ahead of it for this year. Wanted to thank them again for all their help with the budget and transferring everything over. And thanks to Carrie, our payroll specialist, and the finance department for processing the city staff's COLA increases. For the merger feasibility study, the draft of the merger study will be tentatively be ready at the end of next week, and then the final drafts by the end of July, hopefully. The USDA project, Wooten Engineering continues to work on the preliminary design of the new sewer system, including the draft construction plan. We will, as a city, be placing an ad in the 2023 NAACP Freedom Fund Banquet souvenir booklet. The theme this year is Refocus, Reset, and Revive, and tickets are available through the Brunswick County NAACP. And thanks to Elena Dell for helping design that ad. Police Chief Coring asked me to remind everyone that they will be cracking down on their golf inspections and getting the stickers. So far, they have registered 419 golf carts. They've had 5 inspection stations at the Wednesday market at Franklin Square Park. So they will be citing soon, so make sure you get that, and it's a green sticker this year. And also, just a reminder to everyone, we have not received very many applications for the cemetery committee, so please submit those if you are interested. That's all.
Thank you. Excellent report.
Sorry, I do have one more thing.
Okay.
For years of service in Bonnie's tradition, Brian Cohen, 5 years as a volunteer firefighter. John Lowry, 5 years as a volunteer firefighter, and Michael Sullivan as well. Elena Dale, 2 years, she's Assistant Director of Community Relations. Clara Snipes, 2 years as a custodian. Allison Schooler for the Police Department clerk. And Michael McGee, I think for grounds maintenance, 1 year.
All right, great. Congratulations to them. Staff reports have been sent to you. Board comments. Alderman Allen.
I'm glad everybody had a happy 4th, and hope everybody continues to have a great summer. Thank you.
Alderman Carroll. Okay. Alderman Alt.
Have a good night, and thank you for staying this long.
Reverend Lowe Davis.
Couple of things. I'm awfully happy to have seen so many people here for the public hearing on conditional zoning, and to everyone who has gotten up and spoken at this meeting and at the previous workshop on this. For many people, it's not easy to get up and speak in public, especially to a packed house. So I appreciate that. And second, I'm awfully glad that I went to Wilmington to the Mac people and got a new battery for my laptop. You know, our agendas, the whole packet is now online for us, and so we're trying to save trees by not having to print everything. But I don't think my Mac would have made it through this meeting.
Alderman Lombardi.
Yeah, I failed to mention before for my comment, beautification does not schedule any cleanup for July and August. However, this Saturday they are going to finish the staining at the waterfront.
Great, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Mosteller.
Thank you, Mayor. I have something that's a little unusual for me to do, and then I have some other comments about different things. As we're getting ready to go into an election cycle, please do not believe everything you read or hear. For example, last week there was a letter to the editor in the paper with inaccurate information. It's titled, It's About Trust. The letter stated that this board had sold 400 acres without an appraisal in a private sale. Per the requirements of state statute, we discussed potential contracts in closed session. However, to be clear, final action to sell city property must be conducted in a public meeting. The 441 acres have not and will not be sold without notice and being discussed in a public meeting. With regard to Short Street, in 2020, the city manager stated that the reversal of Short Street's one-way traffic pattern had improved safety for pedestrians, bicycles, and other non-motorists. Chief Coring agreed in that meeting, noting the importance of additional public awareness of the change. Regarding the conditional zoning comments, Oakton is not a PUD. Oakton is a by right R10 subdivision, which we discussed earlier, which by law, unlike the conditional zoning process, did not give the board the authority to require changes to accommodate the concerns voiced by neighboring citizens. Lastly, please rest assured that every board member sitting at this table values the collaboration with staff. The new budget demonstrates our commitment and recognition to the value of our professional city staff. Please gather the facts for yourself, and if you have questions or concerns about board actions or processes or decisions, please give me a call. All of the board members' phone numbers can be found on the city website. Also, I have a couple experiences I want to share. In the past few months, we have been, in my life, personal life, we have been building an accessory structure in my backyard, and our backyard. And in other places I have lived, people always talk about how hard it is to work with building permitting offices and inspectors. I am so very proud of living in a community where our planning and inspections department is so professional and staff is committed to the welfare and safety of the public. Throughout the building process, our interactions with Tori Tori, the permitting administrator, and Kylie Barefoot, the city's building inspector, were first rate. Both Tori and Kylie took time to make sure we understood every step of the process, and admittedly, no one likes to be told no when they're trying to get their CO, including me. However, not only was it code, Kylie helped me understand the value of installing vents that had been overlooked. It is with gratitude that I recognize Tori and Kylie for their service to our community. And finally, I want to recognize Officer Kelly Greedo. A couple of weeks ago, I took my 16-and-a-half-year-old dog to unleash for a bath. Afterwards, I put him in the car and turned around to see Mike Eisenberg coming out of the groomers with his dog. So we were chatting. Then I tried to get in my car, and Socks, my old Schnauzer mix, had stepped on the interior lock and locked me out of the car. And of course, my keys were in the car. We couldn't find my spare key at home, so I called the police department to see if they had a tool that could help. That's when Officer Garrido saved the day. Within minutes of arriving, Officer Garrido had the door unlocked, and Socks was on his way home. So Socks and I offer a special thank you to Officer Garrido for her help, and share this small, and I share this as a small reminder of how grateful I am to live in this community. So that's all I got.
So this was an excellent meeting. I want to thank you, Madam City Manager, for your help tonight. And Madam Clerk, thank you for sitting in. City staff, thank you for all you've done. Board, good work tonight. And citizens, thank you. And I'm going to leave you with this final thought. We have that beautiful young man here tonight, Walker Jenkins. And I was thinking about him, and I realized that I graduated from high school 50 years ago, which is very disconcerting right now. So I'm going to go home and have a drink. And Robert Carroll's coming with me.
Is you going to have Insure or Metamucil?
Both. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion and a second. All in favor? Motion carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.